We're going to go ahead and get started. If folks could take their seats, please. And I would like to call this August 20th, 2018 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Our first order of business, as usual, is our Pledge of Allegiance, and I would invite Wink Jordan to lead us this evening. Thank you, Wink. We'll move on to communications from the public. This is time set aside for the public to comment on items that are on the agenda but not advertised for a public hearing. For the record, we do have 5 public hearings this evening. If there's anything you'd like to bring to the attention of the council, now would be the opportunity, and your name and address for the record, please. Rebecca.
Hello, good evening, Mayor and councilors. Rebecca Norton, 530 Scott Avenue. I was wondering if one of you guys could add some money to the capital budget plan for the Parks and Rec. Because I went to the park board last week, Frank was there, and I live near the footbridge, and it's really badly eroding underneath to the point where it's being undercut and very steep, and we had enormous amounts of use this year with people not only swimming but kayaking, paddleboarding, rafting, blah, 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 and so it's really degraded tremendously. There's no grass on there anymore. There's nothing to hold it back. If you'll remember, a few years ago, we had one development along the river on an outside curve that was supposed to keep all of the natural vegetation, and they consequently cut down most of the major mature trees. And we've had 2 major slumps on that same outside curve, one recently and one a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, but it needed filling. The other one needed to have a big jackhammery thing that put rip-wrap stuff in there and held up a brand new house. And so I'm wondering if it's, okay, so you're the hydrologist. Am I not making any sense?
No,
oh,
please
okay.
Continue.
Well, so I just wonder.
Familiar with the area.
Yeah, I just wonder if the lacustrine soil around there is going to get worse and worse and worse because of that degradation on the outside thing. And anyways, I don't think we're going to have any less use of the footbridge. People are still jumping off it all the time, but they're also launching a lot of boats through there. And Maria did say it's on the long-term capital budget proposal, but I didn't see it on there when I went through tonight's. And so I did speak to a landscape architect just to get a rough bid on it. She's the one that did the WAG Park, and she said, I said, do you think 150 to 100,000 would cover it? And she thought probably more. I mean, that's probably more than we need, but who knows with everything going bad. So I was just wondering if one of you could add to the park's capital budget for the next 5 years, $75,000 to $100,000, and I don't know where you're going to get it, but I think if we destabilize that bridge, we will very much regret it, because it's now that one councilor in particular worked very hard to get that river protected. It's been enormously successful, and it's very sweet. It's like a big swimming pool down there. But if the banks are unsafe and people are falling, and I just think it needs to be architecturally looked at, and then hydrologists looked at. And I did mention it to Jim Ellis at our planning board meeting, who's our Flathead Conservation District rep, and he said that Ron Buntmeier's upset about it too, who's the chair of the Flathead Conservation District. So it's on they can't do anything about it, but I think because it's, from what I read, it's not funded for any improvements to that bridge. If we could get it on this year's plan, at least we could do an analysis of it and see how long we have before it completely fails. Because then my neighbor's worried about the bridge failing. I don't know, but I also spoke to Fitzy about it, and he thinks we should be doing things sooner rather than later too. So I know you can't comment back, but when you do that, if one of you guys could figure out if you could add that to the funding, I would probably be less of a pest in the future. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate the comments.
Good evening. My name is Angel Dominguez, and I live at 510 Ramsey Avenue in Whitefish. I actually had sent a letter a couple weeks ago regarding requesting a ban of the sale of fireworks in Whitefish. Excuse me, in Whitefish. The fireworks that the city does are absolutely gorgeous. They're done by professionals, and it's really a true celebration of our nation's freedom, and I commend you for that. However, the unsupervised individuals that can buy any size of fireworks, and basically there's a lot of noise, air pollution, and also garbage, excessive litter every time in my neighborhood after the 4th of July. I know we have regulations with respect to when people can light fireworks, but they're totally ignored. They basically light fireworks many days prior, many days afterwards. Many of them are so big that they actually shake the houses. The National Firework Protection Association Agency, NFPA.org, states that there are 18,500 fires per year that are started by fireworks. Out of those, about 17,000 of them are actually outside fires, i.e. wildfires and others of that similar nature. Those fires average 3 deaths, they average 40 civilian injuries, and then they also average 43 million in direct property damage. The Eagle Creek fire last year, September 2nd of 2017 in the Columbia River Gorge, that fire was started by a 15-year-old with fireworks. He was igniting fireworks. That fire consumed over 50,000 acres. That fire took 3 months to contain it, and 8 months later, on May 20th, it was still smoldering. A New York Times article today talked about, the title of it was, "Behind Most Wildfires, a Person and a Spark. We Bring Fire With Us." It was talking more about the California fires that are raging now, but it basically said that 95% of fires are started by people. Of course, cigarettes, fireworks, car accidents, etc. But fireworks is one of the major factors. We believe in climate change. I know Whitefish does. They've got a sustainability and an action plan in place. You know, we've seen these rising temperatures and prolonged heat waves that are setting up conditions that are going to lead to more devastating fire seasons. City Council spends much time and effort to make this city as unique and improve it and make it as best as they can. Our area has so much to offer, but we have so much to lose if we don't act wisely. I shudder at the thought of a fire in the Whitefish Mountain Range. I care about Whitefish and keeping the beauty we have around us. It only takes one foolish act. Don't let the supposed rights of an individual outweigh the importance of our community and protecting the surrounding area and what we love. Let's be forward-thinking. I would ask that you would consider banning the sale of fireworks in Whitefish. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and your letter will be considered this evening under item 11A of our agenda. Thanks for the correspondence. Rhonda.
Good evening, Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. I have 2 things. I attended the work session at before the last meeting where you reviewed the park's request for some equipment to attend to our community trees. And I see in the capital project budget that there is some allocation to address that, which is great because we have a lot of great trees and some of them have been overlooked for a very long time. However, it did seem like an awful lot of the conversation centered around tree removal, and I didn't hear much conversation about tree replacement, and I would hope that funds would be allocated for putting one in every time one is taken out or where appropriate, because that does seem to kind of get kicked to the curb, and a lot of times there is no budget to put trees in after trees are removed. I have seen that go on for decades here. A few trees were replanted just this year, which is awesome, but we're way in a deficit for our tree replacement, and hopefully there will be some way to find budget for that as well. My second thing is that I had hoped to make a public comment on the 57 Eagle Enterprises sub-area plan at the last meeting, but it got so late and I had to leave. And then I saw on the recording that you had closed the public comment. But I have also seen that there has been an amendment to the proposal or something added. And so I'm hoping that you will take my brief comments into consideration here. The growth policy was a product of the community, a lot of meetings, a lot of participation, and definitely the community had a vision for that area. And I think if you did it again, they would come back with the same vision for that area. I don't think the conditions have changed or the community's appetite, especially for more commercial sprawl, and there is quite a significant increase in the commercial B2 out there. It's kind of slid in with the rest, but that's a big piece of it. It's almost double what the B2 is there now. And I think that's not needed or desired. And the other thing is that I'm not really seeing a public benefit to amending the growth policy, and it seems like there's been a lot of conversation about affordable housing, but that seems to be sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing, because this isn't about affordable housing, and they're not proposing to build affordable housing. There's only a small percentage of affordable housing that might possibly occur there. And the other project, the apartment buildings by the Hampton Inn, are not affordable housing. There are only a handful of affordable housing units in there, and I think that has gotten a little bit muddied in the conversation, and people are thinking this is about affordable housing, which of course we do need, but that's not what's being proposed. And so if that's the public benefit that the council is thinking would accrue, I think you should rethink that, because that's really not the proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Who's next?
Good evening. My name's Doug Rhodes, 1655 West Lakeshore. I'm here to address the property at 124 O'Brien regarding the zone change from 4 units to 6.
Doug, that is a public hearing that we'll
I'm
hold
sorry.
under item 6B, so if you can just hold your
So you gotta
comments
wait for that.
until we call the public hearing, then you'll be more than welcome to reapproach the council. No problem. Lindsay, if you're ready.
I'm ready. Good evening. My name is Lindsay Ramadka. I'm an attorney with Conradi Anderson, 307 Spokane Avenue, Whitefish. I represent members of the Lakes Master Homeowners Association. I submitted comments to you all this afternoon, but I know you probably haven't had time to read those. In the interest of time, I will just briefly summarize those, as I know you have a very full night. It seems clear to me from the last city council meeting that the council is not fond of the CUP maneuver to allow the applicant to develop commercial uses in a primarily residential area and contradictory to existing PUD and zoning regulations. But the council feels compelled to approve this because of the false notion that the developer has a vested right. The council is not obligated to protect this developer's interest. I spoke a lot about vested rights in the last meeting and my concerns were dismissed, but I want to again quickly revisit the topic and clarify some of those comments. According to the July 19th Planning Board minutes, the city believes the applicant has a vested right based on the subdivision plat, the neighborhood plan, and the minutes also reflect that Ms. Jacobs stated the PUD approval. I'm not sure if that was correctly stated in the minutes. But I respectfully but wholeheartedly disagree with Ms. Jacobs on this question. Neither the subdivision plat nor a neighborhood plan can give vested rights to use the property in a commercial manner. Subdivision plats never give rise to a right to use the property in a certain way. They give rights to divide the property a particular way and other rights that are within the plat themselves. I provided you with the subdivision plat for this subdivision. It's Exhibit A in my comment. You will notice that there is nothing in the plat approval regarding commercial use, which makes sense, again, because subdivision plats do not give developers the right to use the property in a certain way, only to divide it. The ability to use property a certain way instead comes from zoning. When the Grouse Mountain Estates Association sued the city based on the vested right to construct a gate on their road, contrary to an ordinance that was passed, the right to construct the gate was literally within the plat itself. Here, there is nothing about the use of Lot 3 as commercial that is within the plat. Again, that's why we have zoning. The city also states that the neighborhood plan gives a vested right to develop commercial. This cannot be. A neighborhood plan, which is part of the growth policy, is not a regulatory document. The plan cannot confer any authority to regulate that is otherwise not specifically authorized by law. So the right to use the lot as commercial cannot arise from the neighborhood plan itself. And to the extent an argument was made that the vested right is found in the prior PUD approval, obviously a PUD hasn't been approved for this lot yet, so no right could have been vested. Under Montana Code Annotated Section 721, 1003, to have acquired a vested right here to develop commercial, the applicant would have 1, apply for a permit, and 2, submit a site-specific site plan. That would mean that the developer would have acquired a vested right once he had submitted an application for the PUD under the prior regulations that would have allowed commercial on this lot. But because the developer didn't do that, he does not have a vested right. Because the developer does not have a vested right, either under statutory law, the subdivision plat, or the neighborhood plan, this clearly constitutes spot zoning. The findings in this ordinance do not address how the general public is benefited. Instead, the ordinance's sole purpose is to help the developer develop his lot. Spot zoning has 3 elements. 1, that the requested use is clearly different from prevailing use. This one is clearly met, as everyone agrees the prevailing use is residential and this is asking for commercial. 2, the area proposed for change is rather small and benefits a few people. This is also met. The area is very small. It's 2.5 acres. It benefits 1 developer. And 3, the ordinance clearly is meant to benefit a few landowners at the expense of the surrounding landowners and the general public. This is also abundantly clear. Dozens of the lake's residents submitted letters to the council and the planning board and attended these meetings to express how their quality of life in their neighborhood will decrease if this ordinance is approved. Traffic will increase, view sheds will be destroyed, wildlife will be displaced, incompatible density will be built, and uses that do not contribute to the neighborhood feeling will be allowed. This ordinance clearly is meant to benefit the applicant at the expense of almost the entire lake's neighborhood and the surrounding landowners. Finally, this is a developer agreement, and it is disguised as law, and it is illegal. The Montana Supreme Court in Heffernan versus the Missoula City Council stated, a contract in which a municipality promises to zone property in a specified manner is illegal because in making such a promise, a municipality preempts the power of the zoning authority to zone the property according to prescribed legislative procedures. My clients urge the City Council to at least allow the city attorney to look into these arguments and respond to them before the City Council passes this ordinance. Otherwise, approving this will constitute an arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful act. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lindsay.
Yes, my name is James Hartshorn, and I live at 3013 River Lakes Drive. I'm roughly 100 yards from the Lot 3 that Lindsay discussed and that we've spoke about several times. This is what you see as far as a map, and this is your Lot 3. Wide open space right here. It doesn't look like that. There's 30 houses there and 60 lots, and that's what we really live in. I mean, those are our homes, just as you would probably not prefer a restaurant or a retail store to come live next to you. That's what's happening to us in this case, if in fact you approve the CUP this evening. There's a plan that Bruce Booty drew up and handed out to us homeowners at our homeowners association meeting. it doesn't miss the mark by very much that I think would, in fact, be something that, that nobody's going to have a problem with, and to call for a further ruling in Kalispell, to have a district court look at that. We don't have a problem with development here. The problem we do have is, what is that one 3,000 square foot building going to be? If it's a medical office, we're all for that. There's 7 medical offices just south of North Valley Hospital. Nobody can say that it doesn't fit into the neighborhood. It look wonderful there. But what we do have is a problem with a bar going in there, a restaurant that serves beer and wine, and have us last call 11 o'clock, and we hear all the noise of people pulling out of there. So that's the problem that we're trying to defend. We live here. And we just don't want our quality of life to be degraded for what's really done on that one little piece of property. And I guess I'm asking for you not to approve the CUP tonight. Have us work with this drawing or other drawings that Rick Barnes comes up with. I think that his intentions are good, but I also think that that what could go in there could be very bad for the neighborhood, and we'll be back here talking about each revision of his plan. This plan isn't bad. If we just knew that that was going to be medical, I don't think there's going to be anybody in the whole neighborhood who's going to have any issue, and it's not going to delay his timeline. There's 30 days to file in district court if the CUP passes tonight. Give us 30 days to work it out with him, and at that time, hopefully we won't have to do anything at all. So let's try to work it out just amongst ourselves here in Whitefish and with the developer. And I think we can come to a successful conclusion with your help on this, with a short delay. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, James.
My name is Sam Neff. I live at 1045 East 4th Street in Whitefish. I was not able to come for the comment period. We have just returned to Whitefish from the Midwest, and my comments have to do with the Eagle development south of on the south part of town. My general feeling is that there are modifications in this program, in this proposal, which have come after the public comment period. They're serious enough to require more comment than is allowed. I find this a complex proposal, and it's not specific enough for the public to understand what's happening, particularly with regard to low-income housing. And personally, I am not happy to see this kind of development taking place further and further south when there is quite a bit of land to the north, particularly north of Super 1, south of and in the neighborhood of the old hospital, which is not being used very well and would be more suitable since it's for this kind of development, since it is closer to the city center. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Further public comment this evening? Sir.
My name is Angelo Carollo. I live at 3005 River Lakes Drive in Whitefish. I'm coming to talk about the Riverside Plan. At the last meeting, the rationale that was raised involved the fact that a place called Iron Oaks or Oak Ridge or Iron Ridge up by Big Mountain, which is a big, beautiful golf community. If the homes there were residential and they stayed residential, who would have the right to change them? We're not discussing that. That was not part of the Riverside Plan. The Riverside Plan said that zoning and mixed-use PUD overlay for Area 2C was abandoned pursuant to the 1999 Riverside and Whitefish Neighborhood Plan. The neighborhood plan states, if abandonment of the proposed development occurs, the planning board shall initiate an amendment to the city council master plan to repeal the neighborhood plan and revert the designated land use back to agriculture or other designation that it finds appropriate. That was what occurred. The development did not take place. It's been over 18 years, the plan still hasn't taken place. Abandonment by definition shall be deemed to have occurred when no improvement or substantial progress has been made on the development for a period of 3 years. This was 1999. By 2002, the planning board was required to make a change back to agricultural. The reason why it didn't, I don't know. But that was what was planned, and that was what was required in the Riverside Plan, which was adopted by the City Council. So that's the problem. This should have been taken care of back then, and it hasn't been taken care of. And now our residents and our community are going to have to suffer because somebody passes a CUP. It's not appropriate. It's not fair. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Further comments from the public tonight? Further public comment? Not seeing any. We'll stay with the audience. Any volunteer board reports from the audience tonight? Usually aren't. How about the council? Richard? No. Katie?
I have one thing to report. The Snow Lot Ad Hoc Committee has finally sent out its notice to the neighbors of the Snow Lot and to the community. We are holding our community kickoff meeting on Thursday, on Thursday, the 6th of September from 6 to 8. What this is going to be is it's an introduction of the process for the design charrette, which will follow on the 19th and 20th of September. Everyone's invited. We encourage everyone to come and give your opinion and understand the process. We're trying to design affordable housing on the Snow Lot, which is the lot that is currently located and housing the central recycling area right by the school. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Katie. Further reports from the council? Not seeing any. We'll move on to item 5, which is our consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the August 6th meeting, or can I have a motion for approval, please? Richard?
I have 2 corrections to the minutes, Mr. Mayor. On page 20 of the packet, 4th line, it should read 80 test pits, not 80 test bits. And on the 9th line, it should change swell to swale.
Thank you, Richard. With those corrections, is there a motion? Andy?
I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Williams. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Michelle? Which brings us on to item 6A. We do have 5 public hearings this evening. We'll start with item 6A, which will be Resolution 18-28. This is a continuation from our August 6th, 2018 meeting, a resolution of intent to adopt the Whitefish 57 Eagle Enterprises Subarea Plan as an amendment to the 2007 Whitefish City County Growth Policy, WPGA 18-01. And again, this was a continuation from the July 2nd, as well as the August 6th public hearing. And we did close the public hearing as indicated earlier by members of the public. With that, I'll turn it over to council for what I would prefer at this point, considering that this has gone through 6 separate public hearings, both at the planning board as well as the council, would be to start with the motion one way or another, and we can begin our deliberations from there. Richard?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Mayor, to deny on resolution 18-28, and if I get a second, I'd like to address it.
Thank you, Richard. There is a motion to deny resolution 18-28. Is there a second to the motion? I'll second. Seconded by Councillor Fury. Richard?
I thought my time was up there, and I was just getting started. I think, and I speak only for myself, but my sense is that amongst other councilors, this has been one of the most challenging and most difficult decisions that we have had to face as a council, because it looks not only at, and we've listened to and taken input and testimony from all sides, and asked to take a look at 30,000 feet. I'm also trying to take a look at the 30, 40, 50-year view of what Whitefish may become. So, like I think other members of council, I've struggled with this. I have gone through my notes over and over. I have read through the various packets and from the planning board and from council meetings, trying to determine where I would come down. And my settling comes to what I view as not what is necessarily best for the closest neighbors or the developers, but to look at what is best for Whitefish in the long run. So I spent a good portion of this afternoon trying to come to grips with exactly how I would view the proposal as presented to us as a council, and the various input up until the time that we closed the public hearing. I think that there are three key elements in my view. The first is density. The density being considered, some might say, is excessive. Whether you want to use that word or not, I don't know, but I personally think that it is. And while it can be argued that the density would be spread over 70 acres, which is the size of the sub-area plan, when you take out the designated or identified wetlands, you take out the commercial, then the density gets consolidated and compressed into somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 acres. Especially when you figure the land that would also be taken out for infrastructure such as the extension of Baker. Number two is the wetlands. That has been an argument that has been before us right from the very beginning. And various iterations have tried to protect the wetlands or deal with the wetlands. They need and deserve protection. And while the sub-area plan identifies that area for protection, there is no actual provision other than the proponent's intent to do so. It is not a given, but it is merely an intent. Third, extraordinary community benefit. The construction of a segment of Baker Avenue that would not connect to any existing piece of Baker, I find to be problematic because in the council meeting, the previous council meeting, looking and discussing the transportation plan, there is no timeline for the future extension of Baker Avenue. It is merely a desire. I think it's a need, but we don't really have any other need than the right-of-way. And I think that the right-of-way would go hand in hand, not the construction, and therefore the construction does not rise, in my view, to the public benefit. Also, the affordable housing does not rise to the level of a 10% affordable housing does not rise to the level that I would see as meeting the extraordinary benefit requirement. Certainly 30% would. We're hopefully going to get to that 20% inclusionary, and the developer in his proposal has said they would add that 10% back in. But again, we don't have that yet. And until such time as we do, I don't believe we can count on the 30%. The only thing we have to rest our, to hang our hat on is the 10%. And since the action by the city for inclusionary zoning, while it's hopeful, and I think we're going to get there, is not a foregone conclusion and is thus speculative. And those are the reasons, and I think those are defensible in my desire or my motion to deny. And I'm sorry for being long-winded, but I thought everyone deserves, both council members and the audience, at least to know my thinking and how I arrived at my decision.
Further comments from the council? Katie.
Richard, you did do your due diligence. And I think every single council member up here has, as Richard said, gone back and forth, read, reread, listened to public comment, read public comment, reread public comment, taken in everything, not in stride, but wholeheartedly. And while, Richard, you do make a compelling argument, I do disagree. I think that this is a large view, and we have a lot of processes to get through and a lot of arduous public comment and processes to go through. This is just the beginning. This is only a request to change the land designation set forth in the growth policy. This is not approving a development. This is not even approving a zoning designation. All of that has to come back before council, gets to go through the public scrutiny, and we can decide whether or not that is appropriate. We can also say that we don't want the density in that area. As we move forward in the staff report that Wendy set out in front of us, it appears to be that this is an appropriate use in terms of looking at the change to the land designation. Furthermore, the community benefit test, I do believe, is met. As we start to move forward and as we start to look at solutions to Spokane and Baker in terms of traffic density and how we are in a holistic way going to actually expand the city and the problems that we have with growth, we do have to look at Baker. And I think that we'll see Baker come to play much sooner than we anticipate due to the fact that we have hit 30,000 trips on Highway 93 South. Furthermore, I understand that to say that we don't have a 20% inclusionary zoning set forth within our policy yet. We are working diligently. And by the time that all of the processes come forward, it will be a long time before we even get to see a PUD come forward that would give us an extension of time to work within an inclusionary zoning. Now, I understand that change and growth is really hard to deal with. And we are at that period in time in Whitefish where change is happening at a rapid pace. People want to live here, people want to move here, people want to invest in Whitefish. And this is one of those growing pains that we're starting to deal with, and it's not going to get easier. And I expect, whether or not this passes, that I will see all of your faces in this room very soon, because it's just going to be a process that we're going to continue to kick this can down the road, whether it's approved or whether it's denied. And so I hope that the developer has given the concessions to the community and listened to them. That is why they've gone back to changing the plan, because they listened to what the neighbors wanted and tried to make it a better plan. And so as we set forth, I want to keep that in mind. And so with that, Richard, I appreciate all the hard work you've done, but I will not vote to deny.
Thank you, Katie. Further comments on the motion? Frank. I think that the issues that...
Microphone on.
Excuse me. The issues that Katie has brought up, and I think highlighted by Richard as well, there may be some disagreement about what is an extraordinary community benefit with respect to what's being offered here. I don't share Richard's view that the extension and creation of Baker is not an extraordinary benefit. I do, however, have hesitations and pauses about the way this plan is laid out,
there is no assurance that that in fact will be developed and paid for in any timeline, or how that would be triggered, or how we might be able to require that as a condition for any further development on that property. I don't know how to do that yet, and it hasn't been proposed by the developer, so that creates a little problem for me in terms of whether we would ultimately get the offer of the extraordinary benefit of Baker. In terms of the affordable housing, I'm on both sides of the fence with respect to both Richard's approach and Katie's. I think we would get there. We're not there yet. I would be more comfortable with a description of what was required on this property in terms of residential if it were offered that it produce a variety, I'll call it, of housing types, which would include single as well, single family detached, single family attached, including both owner occupied as well as rental. Without some kinds of assurances, I think that makes it difficult for us to have any assurance that the types of housing that would go in there would in fact meet our housing needs assessment and be consistent with what Whitefish wants. Now, that may be in fact what is intended or what they might want, but I can't at this level, I have a hard time approving it on that basis alone without those kinds of changes. We can argue about, or I can argue about, whether 200 or 250 is the right number in terms of limiting the numbers that might go in there. I'm less worried with that as I would be as long as we were getting what I'll call, or could have some promise of a variety of housing sources and ownerships for that area. And then the last thing that I have problem with in terms, again, I kind of view it as it's a mitigation, but I view it as a community benefit that's being offered here, and that is the protection of the wetlands. Yes, they were removed from the development area, but they weren't otherwise protected, or there were no assurances that we can give or can require of this application at this time that I'm aware of that would in fact assure that those wetlands would be in fact protected in perpetuity, and any development around all of the wetlands, either side, would in fact be consistent with the city's water quality regulations. So for that reason, I have sat on the fence. There's a motion before us to deny based on some of these issues. I think I'm going to have to support that at this particular time. I think there are ways for this thing to work, and I think that I struggle with the right answer on how to get it fixed, but I can't fix a developer's proposal by redrawing it. I don't think that's fair to the developer, and I think I have to evaluate what's in front of me.
Thank you, Frank. Further comments on the motion? Wanted a point of clarification before we take a vote on the actual motion, Richard. Statutorily, as a city, we are required to adopt a resolution of intention to either adopt with revisions, or reject the proposal in front of us. And the resolution was obviously drafted in the affirmative for adoption. So as part of your motion, we will need to direct staff to bring back a resolution of intention to reject at the next regular meeting, which I believe is September 4th, and I just wanted to ensure that that was consistent or implied with your motion, and get an okay from the second, which was Councilor Fury.
Could you repeat that so I can make sure that, or do you need a comment from me to direct staff to bring back?
You could just indicate to my suggestion. I think that would be sufficient.
I agree with the mayor's suggestion.
Okay. Andy, is it okay with the second? Andy, comments?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief, because we've been going through the long, slow, painful root canal here for 6 or 7 months, and I think everybody stated it pretty well. This is a hard decision for us, and it's a very difficult decision, and I mean, I'm like Frank, I'm like Richard and Larry, I'm pretty much sat on the fence up until probably a half hour ago. I mean, I can argue this both directions equally well. I think sadly we've been lost a little bit in detail that is really not relevant at this point, but yet you can't totally discount that detail, because at some point that is going to come back to haunt us. And I think, by example, I look at it, and WR2 is the zoning that's called out. I think even though that's not necessarily the zoning that would ultimately be adopted, there's going to be a public expectation, and there's going to certainly be an expectation on the part of the developer that they're going to get 250 units and they're going to get WR2 zoning. We don't know that's the case at this point, but I think that going forward is the direction we're going to be pointed, and it's going to be difficult to derail the train at that point, and I see that. I feel for the applicant because I think they've made some very genuine attempts to direct neighborhood concerns, and I think they've done so willingly. I think they've done so honestly, and unfortunately they've been a little rebuffed at every turn, and that's been viewed as a way to talk the thing to death, and I feel for them. I don't think that's been entirely fair. I'll be really honest. I'm going to defend our public process. We've been beat up over that, certainly in the paper today. We've had 6 public hearings. I think that's a lot of public input. People could have got up and spoken again tonight at public comment if they wanted. Just because our public hearing was closed didn't mean that they couldn't comment, couldn't mean that they couldn't bring us letters or emails, which they did. And the people that were still concerned, they brought that to us. So I think we've had a good and fair public process. So I kind of, I get a little touchy about that. I think we do a very good job here in the city of Whitefish, and every time someone questions us on that, I think we all sit down and we question ourselves and we look at it and try and make sure that we're doing the best job we can, and I feel that we have in this case. But what it comes back down to for me, I think, in the end, as I've looked at this, it's an awfully big ask. And when we go from an urban density down to what it's currently in the growth policy as a suburban residential, and we start looking at that kind of density as opposed to what's there. And there was a conscious effort, Rhonda was very correct, there was a conscious effort to have that in the growth policy as suburban residential. And given the fact that we're a little overdue for a growth policy update, given the fact that we're going through the Highway 93 corridor study, if I look at those things, I kind of have to say to myself, and if I look at how I've sat up here and the way I've looked at issues and what's good for the community for the 20-plus years I've been here, I would say that almost every time I would say, it's not good to just amend the growth policy. We need to take a little more holistic view at it. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to support Richard's motion, which is why I seconded it, and do that same thing here. And my guess is if we went out and we polled throughout the community, I think we would probably find pretty overwhelming support for a motion to deny. And reason being, whether that's correct or not, but I think if we look at the frenzied pace of things that are happening around here, and when things get moving really quickly, people do start to be concerned about it. And I think community-wide, we would probably find pretty good support for saying no tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and support the motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. And the motion does carry on a 4-2 vote with Councilor Hennon and Councilor Williams voting in opposition. Thanks, everyone, for your time and attention to this matter. And it's been a good process, and I'm sure we'll see you back here again at some point in the near future. We'll go ahead and move on to what will be item 6B of our agenda, which is a request by 124 O'Brien Lot LLC, Ostrom, for a conditional use permit to develop a mixed-use building with 6 residential units located at 124 O'Brien Avenue, which is zone WB3, which is our general business district, and this will be WCUP 18-05. Bailey.
Good evening.
How are ya?
So this application was originally discussed at the April 19th Planning Board meeting. At that time, the applicant was requesting a conditional use permit to develop a mixed-use building with 2 commercial spaces, just as I'm going to explain here, the same thing, but with 8 residential units that would be on the 2nd and 3rd floors. They were also proposing 8 covered parking spaces, access from both the side and rear of the adjacent properties. However, at that April meeting, the planning board voted unanimously to recommend denial of the application. And so in order to deal with the concerns that were raised by the surrounding neighbors and at the time of the planning board, the applicant decided to hold and resubmit the application instead of continuing on to city council. So this is the first time you guys have seen this proposal. So they revised their application. So now they're still proposing a mixed-use building. It would still include 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor, but they've reduced it down to 6 residential units that would be split between the 2nd and 3rd floors. They are still proposing 8 parking spaces on the ground floor of the building in 2 kind of covered parking garage areas. The access to the site is from the alleys, both at the side and rear of the property. And just as a point of note for you guys, the applicant was granted a variance back in December of 2017 to reduce the rear setback down to 0 feet and reduce the front setback to 15 feet. However, with their revised application, they are including some voluntary setbacks on both the sides and the rear at this time. So I did kind of do a little comparison between both their original application and their revised application. That was on the first page of my staff report. I don't know what page it's on in your packet since we're not really doing a big combined packet, but it's on the first page of my staff report. So a conditional use is required because they are in excess of 4 residential units. So it's those 2 residential units are really what we're the CUPs for. So the subject property is approximately 0.154 acres or around 6,700 square feet. It's the little red box that I put up there. And that was taken from the Google Earth, so that's as of 2017 is what that photo is from. And I'll go to the next one here. So now this is the site plan. So the current site is vacant. The property is zoned WR3, which is our general business district. It also is located within the Old Town Railway District of the WB3. It's surrounded by residential to the north. There is a commercial parking lot to the west, but it is zoned WR4, so it's a residential zone. There is a commercial use to the south, and then residential and commercial to the east as well. The growth policy does designate this area as core commercial. That does correspond with our WB3 zoning. It would connect to all city services. We did mail a notice to the adjacent landowners within 150 feet of the parcel on June 29th. We mailed advisory agencies and also placed a legal in the pilot on July 4th. All total, I've had 26 comments that have been submitted. There were 16 comments that were submitted in opposition prior to the planning board. I had 1 additional comment before the planning board, 2 at the planning board meeting, and then 7 additional comments that have been received after my council packet was finished. In total, there were 19 comments in opposition and 7 in support. All of those had either been included in your packet or were handed out to you this evening by Michelle. The concerns raised were about the shortage of parking in the neighborhood, access from the adjacent alleys, surrounding commercial projects, number of proposed units, safety of pedestrians, and the proposed regrading of the alley. So the proposed use does comply with the growth policy designation of core commercial. As I said, it's zone WB3, and the uses are consistent with that zoning. As previously mentioned, it's in the Old Town Railway District, which residential uses are actually permitted on the ground floor. They would have to provide more parking requirements for that, but they're proposing 2 commercial spaces instead. So residential, they could do it on the ground floor as well if they chose to. As I said, the setbacks, the WB3 actually requires a prevailing setback along the front, no setbacks on the side, and 15 feet on the rear. This property is unique because of that commercial parking lot to the rear that is actually a residential zone. So they would have had to do a setback off of that property. However, when they got that variance through the Board of Adjustment in December, they actually were permitted to have 0 setback off the rear and 0 off the sides, and then 15 feet off the front. With their revised application, they're doing a voluntary setback of 6 feet off the rear property line, which is off the western alley, and then a side setback of 1 feet 3 inches along the other alley, and then a variable setback of 3.5 to 4 feet along the northern property, which is adjacent to the residential house that's on that property. There is no residential density standard in the WB3. Generally, parking is the determining factor for how many residential units you could fit on the property. Parking for the residential units is provided at 1 space per unit. For residential uses above the ground floor. There are no parking requirements for the commercial spaces. The parking is being met with a total of 8 spaces on site, so there are actually 2 spaces in excess of what they are required to have. So 6 parking spaces is only what they're required, and they're providing the 8 spaces. And that was based off of the comments and concerns that residents raised about the parking conditions in this area, so they decided to keep those. So over the past few years, the trend in this neighborhood has been to develop more commercial and mixed-use buildings. These types of development do increase traffic and parking demand compared to traditional single-family dwellings. However, as I previously mentioned, the current zoning in this entire area is the WB3 district, which does exempt parking requirements for all commercial uses and reduces the standard for those ground floor residential. So although the proposal cannot address the parking problems within the surrounding area, parking requirements in general should become a future discussion, and we are working towards that effect, as you all are aware of. So. The zoning does permit a maximum building height of 45 feet or 3 stories maximum. Any portions of the building exceeding 35 feet do have to be set back 20 feet from the street right of way. And these appear to be met based off the plans that they submitted and will be confirmed at the time of building permit as well. And there is no maximum building lot coverage in the WB3. So as I said, the access is from the existing alleys located at the west and the south side of the property. The building will be required to have a full sprinkler system and a full monitored system as required by the fire marshal. I'm trying just to hit the highlights here. So, buildings in the WB3 are exempt from landscaping requirements if they're developed to the 0 lot line. Since they are doing voluntary setbacks, they will have to comply with our landscaping requirements. And again, that would be confirmed at the time of building permit. City water and sewer are available along O'Brien Avenue. Since they will exceed our 5,000 square foot threshold, they will be required to submit an engineered stormwater plan, and that would be reviewed at the time of building permit. Let's see. A traffic study is not required for the project as it falls under our 200 trip threshold. The entire length of 2nd Street was upgraded with the state of Montana several years ago. Additionally, their revised proposal, they are proposing to widen the existing alley to the south from 12 feet paved surface to a 16-foot paved surface. So once completed, it would actually look similar to the upgraded alley that is behind the 2nd Street lofts area. And so they will be required to obtain approval and work through that process with Public Works as well. But they are proposing to widen that alley with their project. So the neighborhood compatibility, so that looks at the structural bulk massing scale. Obviously, the Architectural Review Committee will be required to review the proposal. Since the property is vacant, any new building on this lot is definitely going to seem out of character and change the overall look and feel of this area, especially since there is a single-story residential structure directly to the north of the project. However, the redevelopment of this district, there are more and more buildings that are being constructed to the maximum size and height permitted in the WB3. So while it's currently out of character with the area, it is going in that direction of what the character of this neighborhood is actually kind of changing. The existing neighborhood, it is a mixture of high and low density residential and commercial uses, so it isn't out of character with the neighborhood and what's going in there. And as I said, there's no density requirements. So staff recommended approval of the application subject to 13 conditions. The Whitefish Planning Board met on July 19th and considered the request. There were 11 members of the public other than the applicants and their representative that spoke at that meeting, and I did attach those draft minutes to the packet for you to review. Following the hearing, the Planning Board voted 4-1 to recommend approval of the application to City Council, and I'm happy to answer more detailed questions if that would help.
Thanks, Billy. Any questions for Billy on our staff report? Not at this time. Thanks, Billy.
Mr. Mayor, should I make?
Please, Frank. Yeah.
I would like to recuse myself from this decision. I'm a tenant in a building that's adjacent to this property, and I've done work for that building over the years and feel compelled that it might whereas I have no actual conflict here because I have no pecuniary interest in either thing, I feel compelled to remove myself from this decision.
Thank you, Frank. Let the record reflect that Frank will be abstaining from a vote on this item. With that said, we did, excuse me. Melissa, I'm sorry.
Unfortunately, I'm in a similar situation as Frank, so I feel that, because my office too is located in the building adjacent, and again, I have no financial benefit to either outcome, but if Frank is recusing himself, I'm thinking that's probably most appropriate for me to do the same.
Okay. Thanks, Melissa. Let the record reflect that Councillor Hartman will also be abstaining from a vote on item 6B this evening. Anyone else wishing to abstain?
I live
We
4
may not
blocks
have a
away,
quorum.
right?
With that said, we did advertise for a public hearing on what will be item 6B. I would invite the applicant, if Chris Ostrom's here tonight, if you have anything to add, or Aaron on behalf of the applicant, now would be your opportunity. Name and address for the record, please.
Hello, Aaron Wallace, 265 Hawks Lake Lane, Whitefish, Montana. I'm the principal architect from Montana Creative and architect involved in this project. And so thanks Bailey and thanks Council for taking a look at this. I'm going to go through the project very quickly for you guys and outline a few of the elements that we heard from concerns related to the public and planning board and how we hopefully address them throughout this project. The first thing is that we wanted to make sure that we outlined, because there seemed to be a lot of confusion on this, is that what we're allowed to do is a 3-story building up to 45 feet. That could be all commercial or included in there up to 4 residential units. What we're proposing is basically 2 commercial units of about 1,800 total square feet between the 2 units and 6 residential units. So the 2 extra 4 are allowed. The 2 extra are allowed, but with your guys' approval. So what we're here for is, again, just the 2 additional residential units. The project itself, if you kind of take a look at the floor plan, if you kind of have towards the east-hand side there, you'll see kind of some curved circular areas. That's a stairway going up to a kind of a mid-level patio for that first 15 feet on the east side, along with an ADA ramp. That patio will be kind of landscape, will have trees, some vegetation in there. It then moves in towards the first floor level for the commercial units and a common stairway. The commercial level is kind of, or that first floor level is split between 2 things. The alleyway in the site slopes up toward the west. And so if you look at the kind of dashed area for the parking areas to the south, a person would enter in off that alleyway and park him up at the angle. Currently, that alleyway is only paved to about 12 feet. Then it starts sloping up and isn't all the way to the edge of the property. What we're proposing is extending that alleyway up further to the north, paving it its full 16 feet, plus another 1.5 feet before you be hitting the edge of the building. So at that point, a vehicle would have almost 17.5 feet to be able to pull in there at the angle, back out, and then exit out towards the west. The slope of that alleyway is just about the same as our parking ramp. So it's certainly there is a slope, there is some slippage in the winter and stuff like that, but it's nothing too concerning at this point. You then would extend up towards the north and the west, and you'd have an additional 4 parking spots that exit off to the alleyway to the west. That's again still on that first floor level, but up at a higher height. Currently there's parking, people that park in kind of 3 spots that are on the property just off the west end there. It's a little bit of a paved area which people use. We're expanding that alleyway from its current 16 feet at the edge of the property line, an additional 6 feet before the start of the building, before the parking spots. So we're hoping to do there is really improve the radius and turning and visibility around that corner. As part of this project, what we're planning on doing is improving that alleyway to the south, and it's slow up and around that area. Currently, it's a little bit up and down and uneven. We've tried to bring it up as much as we can to all current city standards. So that area has been a concern for the neighborhood. What we want to do is address that concern, make it as safe and as reliable as possible. That alleyway heading up to the north, again, has a slope to it. And again, we'd be able to get enough width in there to be able to do a 90-degree turn and parking in and out. So the first floor is all kind of parking and commercial level elements. Then we would have a second story of 4 residential units, each of them a 2-bedroom, and then 2 penthouse type units up on the 3rd floor of 3-bedroom units. They'd all have some outside parking and everything else like that. or outside decks and elements. What we've done is not only pulled the building in kind of the parking and everything else like with the setbacks, but to help to reduce the overall mass. The massing and the overall size of the building was a concern with the initial design. By pulling the building in from the property lines a bit, we're helping to reduce all the their overall mass of the building, and also by getting rid of the 2 extra units, we've helped pull in the building on that 3rd floor from its property, from the edge of the property, where before it was all out to the edge of the building. So if you look at the 3rd story floor plan, it's quite a bit condensed from the original plan. So that's kind of an outline of the building. A few things that what we had done was that we had TD&H Engineering take a look at our design and site plan and see if we were actually able to get people in and out of these alleyways. There was a concern of, you know, do you actually have enough space? According to their Autodesk vehicle tracking software, which is the standards that the city uses for parking and street services, we should be able to handle smaller vehicles and cars and smaller SUVs to be able to swing in and out of those parking spots with no problem. Larger vehicles and trucks would have to do a little bit of a multi-point turn. Again, this is not any sort of different slope or widths that we're talking about than actually what's in the parking ramp. So you can kind of picture with a larger vehicle, if you have to do a couple little turns to get into your parking spot, it's very similar, actually a little bit easier what we'd be proposing and doing because of the angled parking and the extra widths we have. So hopefully we address that from a design standpoint. Some of the other aspects that we had to take a look at was, you know, one of the big concerns we heard about with the community was that there was just basically no parking in the area at all. And so Chris Ostrom will be able to talk a little bit. They did a little bit of their independent study, which is you've seen in your packet. We followed that up from our office where they looked at it in June. We looked at it in the middle of July. I had somebody come down from our office and for about a week and during very times of the business days, and they were able to find a parking spot, or, you know, in front of the building with about a half-block radius pretty much every time they went down there. And at no time was the parking lot that's to the west ever full where you didn't have one parking spot. So I'm sure certainly at times during the day these elements would be full, but it wasn't a consistent type basis. I'd also say this is fairly typical. Our office is located a block and a half to the north. We've always been able to park within 50 feet or right in front of our doors. I know that during the winter, these roads can get fairly compressed with a lot of the snow, which is great to hear. We got a plowing solution for that, but it wasn't anything where any of our staff, myself personally, or our clients have had any issues or any sort of accidents related to driving in this district for about the last 8-9 years. So that's a little bit just personal experience just being down the street. Also, what we had done was that we hired Abilene Traffic Services, who knows the city and this area very well, to give us their professional opinion on the project and how it may affect the parking situation in the railway district, and to see if the public's concern was really a valid one where there just wasn't any parking available. His letter, though he didn't do a traffic study, was included in your packet and outlines that our project meets and now exceeds the parking requirements with the overall goal and intentions of the current parking supply and space allotment in the city core areas, which is consistent with the 2015 Whitefish Downtown District Master Plan. In summary, he outlines that there is no specific reason the proposed Ostrom development will create any special parking supply problems in this area, and that the project meets the zoning regulations for the area and the intended development goals of the city of Whitefish, i.e. a blank vacant lot in the middle of the Railtown district was outlined in the master growth plan to be a developable lot. I would say this is consistent with my personal experience. Oh, let's see here. I already said that, so I will totally skip out down to there. Anyways, I think that's kind of the basis of the outline of the design of the building, how we've gone back and tried to address, pull the building out and listen to the city's concern or public's concerns, make it a little bit more compact, less intrusive building. We meet all the height requirements. We meet all the zoning requirements. We exceed all the parking requirements. We meet all the setback requirements. So all the building meets all the city standards. We will have to go through architectural review for the final design of the building, but what we're here for is finally, again, asking for those 2 additional units for the parking spots, or for the overall building. And I'll turn that over to Chris. He can review things.
Thanks, Aaron. Any questions for Aaron before he leaves the dust?
I
Richard.
do. Thanks. Aaron, 2 questions. One, what kinds of commercial development do you envision, or would anybody else envision, in 900 square feet?
What we've been seeing is that the smaller type units of 500 to 1,000 square feet are very desirable in this area. We're anticipating small office type scenarios, very similar to what's being offered in the buildings just to the south. So what you're talking about is small professional office type spaces, attorneys. I don't anticipate retail being very successful there. It's more of kind of a small office space type element is what we've seen. Similar to what we have in our building just to the north, you know, even the Zane Rays and stuff around the block. That's what we've seen there. I know the limited times that people have tried to put retail in this district, it doesn't quite work. So that's what we've seen and anticipate would have success there.
Okay. Second question. You referred twice, at least,
yeah,
about the slope in the parking garage.
Sure.
And that the slope in the alley shouldn't therefore cause any problem. But I do remember that the parking garage is covered in the winter and not, not the alley.
Absolutely. We try to cover it. No, we live in a mountain town. There are slopes and areas around here. I gave that as a reference to understand kind of what the slope is, what we're talking about there. It isn't a steep 8, 9, 10% grade. What we're talking about is 7% or less, which is fairly, I think it was 0.66 is what I kind of remember if I calculated it through there. So that's what is graded at currently. There is some flexibility with how I think we can kind of make it tie into even lessen that grade a little bit because it's kind of up and down and wobbly in areas. So our hope is that we can improve grade by widening it, by smoothing it out, by allowing better turning radiuses. But certainly there is a grade there. I just gave that as a reference to kind of give you an understanding of what that actual slope would be.
Yeah, and I guess my concern is that in the wintertime, because our alleys are lower priority, that gets packed out, somebody backs out and then can't go forward. In other words, so then they have to back down the alley to find a place to start their vehicle.
Sure. So if you take a look at that site plan that's up there, that's kind of been going on already. There's already 2 parallel parking spots right to the south, which gets used all winter long. So those vehicles would again have to come up, park back in, and then go all the way through. Certainly if that is a situation where these units are not able to go up the alleyway at that slope for whatever reason, it's not atypical of what anybody else has been doing along in that alleyway for the last 10, 15 years. They've been accessing that alleyway. They would then have to back up out of there onto the road that way. This is not a high, it's like a 93 highway corridor traffic level road. It's a fairly low impact to be able to back out of there. I know that I back up out of that street, and there's actually the building units in our building all back out, directly back out onto O'Brien Avenue. So it's not an atypical situation to actually have to back out from the alleyway or the street side. The parking garage, as you can see, the unit just to the north of that is a driveway access that backs out onto that O'Brien Street too. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
Chris.
Yeah, thanks. Chris Ostrom. My wife Natasha and I used to live just kind of next door at 238 Lupfer, but we're currently at 10 Brewyer Way in Kalispell. And so just a couple brief comments just to kind of reiterate some of the thoughts behind a lot of the feedback from the community and the neighbors that we heard throughout the 2 public, the planning board meetings. So Aaron did mention that Natasha and I produced a somewhat non-scientific traffic study of our own, kind of over the Memorial Day weekend and that week. So for 8 consecutive days, we went to the lot twice a day and kind of just took pictures of the area, right? And so on the 2nd Street lofts, 13 covered parking spots, there was anywhere from 0 to 3 cars out of the 13 spots. There were always a few spots along the street, and then the parking lot to the west of the Riverside Plaza was never totally full. Obviously, we understand our building cannot use the Riverside Plaza lot, right? But it was kind of an indicator that there wouldn't be overflow traffic from Riverside Plaza to the street itself. And so we took probably 60 or 70 pictures. We included a few. And I know that's a subjective thing, right? Of course, there are times when probably every parking spot is full, especially in July, but it's also probably true that it's less busy in the shoulder seasons, right? But it was just somewhat of an indicator. We also heard some comments that 6 residential units could mean that there's 12 families that would live there. which could mean up to 24 vehicles. We honestly don't feel that's probably anywhere close to what reality would be for this. Again, I think the building to the east, the 2nd Street lofts, is a fairly good example of kind of what we're looking at, even though our building is much smaller. We're still offering the covered parking units, and it would be a similar type of building with commercial and mixed-use residential. So that's somewhat of an indicator. Again, regarding the Riverside parking lot, we absolutely agree with the neighbors that if somebody from our building parked there, they should be towed at owner expense, and we can try to help police that. Although we don't anticipate that being a huge issue, we understand it is a concern. So we want to try to help with regulating that. As Aaron mentioned, and you, Richard, regarding backing into the alleyway, I believe Riverside had mentioned in the past that they pay for some snow plowing, and we would absolutely help contribute to that fund or help pay for that as best that's reasonable to try to keep that alleyway clear. As far as backing into an alleyway, it's been mentioned that that's maybe a little bit unusual, but if you think about it, we kind of do that all the time, right? Whether it be a grocery store, 2nd Street Lofts is backing into the same alleyway from their parking spots, and even Central Avenue has angled parking where you have to back into Central Avenue, which is obviously a much busier street than this alleyway will be. So there was also some comments regarding that more than 4 units isn't allowed. And I think my understanding is correct, is that 4 units of residential or less is automatically approved, but something more than 4 units requires a permit. Obviously, more than 4 units is allowed since 2nd Street Lofts has 18 total units, 139 2nd Street across the street the other direction, I believe has 9 total units. So it is allowed, although it does require the permit, which is what we're talking about here tonight. We also feel that the emergency response vehicle access will actually be improved, not diminished, because we're planning on widening the alleyway to the south from 12 feet to 16 feet. And we do agree that the parking in this part of town is not ideal, right? It does get congested. When there are cars on both sides of the street, it does somewhat turn into one-way traffic. But based on all the 8 covered parking spots, which is 2 more than is required by zoning, we really feel that this building probably won't impact that really one way or the other as far as a tipping point. Regarding the variance, I know Bailey mentioned it during her report, but regarding the variance that was granted all the way back in 2017, just to kind of mention briefly, that the parking lot to the west is zoned residential, and that's the only reason we applied for the variance. So in other words, because the variance was granted, it brought our lot to have the same setbacks as every other commercial lot throughout WB3. So to us, it wasn't something unique. It actually kind of brought it up to the same setbacks allowed for all the other commercial lots within WB3. And then lastly, you know, zoning allows for a 3-story building, which, for example, could be 100% commercial, and that would require no parking spots, right? And that building could actually be bigger than this proposed building with the building to all 3 of the property lines to the sides and to the back. We actually felt this building would be better, even though it's smaller and has 6 residential units. It does have the 8 total parking spots, which is 2 extra than is required. Or for example, you could have the same size building with just 4 residential units and 4 parking spots, and we wouldn't have to go through the conditional use application. But again, we felt with the 2 extra residential units but 4 extra parking spots, that actually is a better use and a better benefit to the community and to everyone, and felt it was a better building than some of the alternatives. And again, it's currently a vacant lot, so that's something to keep in mind. So are there any questions? I was hoping Natasha could just say something very brief, but any questions?
Thanks, Chris. Any questions for Chris on his presentation? Not seeing any. Thanks,
Okay,
Chris.
thank
Natasha.
you.
Hi, Natasha Ostrom, and my husband said we live at 10 Brewer Way in Kalispell, Montana. Chris and I want to maintain majority ownership of this building, and we want to be good stewards of this building, and we want to give it to our grandbabies. So any problems that comes up with parking and the alleyway are problems we're going to be dealing with decades. So I want to build the building smart now so that I'm not having to deal with these problems for decades. And I know there's concerns about the alleyway. We're going to plow it all the time, probably, because the city just won't plow it enough. And those are going to be my people parking in those parking spots, and I'm going to care about their access because I'm going to be the one hearing about it. I think the city of Whitefish talks a lot about, and everyone talks about, that the city's growing and changing, and how do we deal with that? And everyone's like, well, we need to make sure there's smart developments going in. And I think this is one of them. There's a lot of buildings approved that did not give extra parking, that did not come off the setbacks, that did not give any allowances. And I think we gave all that we could to build the best building. I think this is a smart building, as much as you might hear from neighbors that they're upset about it because change is hard and it's an empty lot. Who doesn't want to just keep an empty lot? But this is a better building than what could be built, than what zoning automatically allows. And so we're asking for that. Thanks.
Thanks, Natasha. Thank you both. We'll start with our public testimony now, and I do have a sign-up list, but if you didn't sign up, that certainly doesn't mean you can't provide public comment on this item. We'll start with Wink. And then Rita Hansen, and then Doug, of course.
Wink Jordan, 235 Glenwood Road. I also own 110 2nd Street East, which is a commercial condominium, business condominium in the Riverside Plaza building. You know, it's been interesting listening to the developer and the developer's representative talk about this building that started at the Board of Adjustments to increase the footprint of the building. And they first came forward with a building that included 2 commercial units and 8 condominium units, or apartment condominium units. Because of the pressure, it's been shrunk, downsized to a building that has more setback and 6 residential units. Still, with 2 still in excess of what's allowed by the zoning in the WB3 zoning. And I think that, you know, the council needs to look at this zone and what's going to happen in this zone in the future, because we're going to be dealing not only with vacant lots, but with older residential properties that are going to be removed and developers wanting to do things there. And are we going to be looking at approving conditional use permits for every building that comes before you in this zone, and the parking issues and the traffic issues that are going to be involved with that, with those requests for conditional use? I would suggest that the building conform to the zoning, and that makes your job easier. And I think for the future of the neighborhood, probably sets a precedent to move forward with. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Wink.
Rita Hansen, 528 Ramsey Avenue residence, and I've been an occupant at Riverside Plaza for over 30 years. I have been asked to write or read a statement from Rob Farrington, who got called to Seattle. I hope that's permissible. Dear City Council, thank you for hearing my absentee letter of opposition. I am opposed to the Ostrom Development Plan in its current form due to pedestrian safety issues, traffic flow, as well as an extreme lack of parking. With previous presentations to the City Planning Board, it was originally decided against the Ostrom project 5-0. With very little change in the development and a private conversation by Ms. Ostrom to one of the City Planning Board members, the City Planning Board, in complete disbelief to those of us who live and work in proximity to the proposed project, was then voted for at 4-1 approval. Despite the overwhelming letters and testaments of opposition to the project, Mrs. Bailey, for some reason during the last city planning meeting regarding this project, not only went over once, but twice, all the reasons she believed the project should be approved, and with almost total disregard for the countless letters that opposed the project. She openly dismissed the concerns as not important or valid. I personally sent in photos directly to her and the planning committee showing traffic full in our private parking all along O'Brien Avenue, on 93 in front of the 1993 building, as well as the loft apartments. I also sent in a photo of my truck at a 45-degree angle in the alleyway, clearly demonstrating that there is simply not enough room for average-sized trucks or larger SUVs to navigate this blind, off-angle, slippery slope to park at their proposed parking. I find this bordering on gross negligence of the City Planning Board. We repeatedly expressed that this was a very tricky alley to negotiate with cars and trucks sliding down it through the winter, trucks having to get a run at it from across the street, and cars sliding back down it. All this, and they are just trying to go straight up the alley, let alone having to jump up a 4 to 5 inch snow/ice center raised portions, which often causes our cars to go sideways into the alley when trying to park in our private parking. My office looks onto the alley, and I see pedestrians using this alley throughout the day, as well as cars from surrounding buildings and delivery vehicles. If you can spot an absurdity in this attempt at trying to make parking work for the building and see that it will cause a serious safety issue, then you must deny the proposal, as without these parking spots, there is not the required number of spots for the proposal. Additionally, Ms. Ostrom has openly spoke about this being for short-term rental, AKA a hotel building. Her units, with each room having its own bath, just like a hotel, then it should be seen as a hotel and not a residential building. I believe hotels must provide 1 parking spot per room, so this far exceeds the space available. Residence, by definition, is, quote, living in a space for some length of time, a home, unquote. This is a hotel/Airbnb and does not add to or benefit the surrounding residences, people's homes, or business, but greatly takes away from them. Traffic flow has become hazardous, which much of the traffic avoiding the traffic lights and intersections and taking these side streets such as O'Brien, which is now a 1-car only street where vehicles are parked on it. It has become dangerous to pull out onto 93 from O'Brien. We have witnessed on a daily basis the disregard for the private parking in the Riverside Plaza parking by occupants of other buildings. The loft apartment tenants are using up much of O'Brien Avenue for their additional additional vehicles, and the commercial spots have no parking for their customers. Please remember, there is another nightly rental condo going up directly across the street, which will increase the parking demand and traffic. So to close, it is clear that this project lacks the dignity to provide adequate parking for its occupants, has complete disregard for the safety of local pedestrians as well as the current homeowners and business owners, and is ignorant of traffic problems due to its density. Mrs. Ostrom knew this was not zoned for what she is trying to build before buying the property, but has manipulated the system and somehow the City Planning Board to get it this far. I trust you will see the disastrous effect this approval of this property would have on the existing residents, the landscape, traffic, and most importantly, safety, and deny the proposal. Thank you for your time. Kind regards, Rob Farrington, who resides at 215 Meadows Road in Whitefish, as well as an owner-occupant in the 1993 building.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you. And my comment, please?
Sure.
I rise in opposition to the approval of this CUP as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board at their July meeting. It is not compliant with the WB3 zoning. It is dangerous and unsafe, a heavily congested area, poor visibility, blind corner, poor lighting, steep and icy hill on basically a heavily traveled one-lane street. In addition, the resubmitted or amended proposal has the appearance of having a, quote, reduction of occupancy from the initial proposal of 4 units with 8 bedrooms for a total of 16. On the third, the reduction is on the 3rd floor. The change is to 2 units of 3 bedrooms with 3 private baths, with a central kitchen and living area. This has all the appearances of a Y or communal living situation whereby each bed and bath can be locked and let separately. So basically, there is no reduction in occupancy. The only reduction is from 16 bedrooms to 14. If approved as submitted, it should be approved only with the condition of approval precluding lock-off units. And you see that also out at Whitefish Lake Lodge. They have lock-off units. Before this vote was taken, Judy Hesseland disclosed that she and the applicant discussed this matter at the grocery store before the hearing. Once Ms. Hesseland disclosed that she had ex parte contact with the applicant in this quasi-judicial hearing, she should have recused herself from voting. Instead, she voted. Even of more concern, the chair should have prevented her from voting due to a conflict of interest and violation of the Whitefish City ethics policy, i.e. the appearance of a conflict of interest. And in the minutes, though she stated she had no interest in the project, it still cast an appearance. The proposal falls into the conditional use category. However, the only conditions suggest to date apply as well to any permitted use in the WB3 district. Thank you for your consideration on the proposal for denial of the CUP. And in regard, I would like to add one comment. The parking lots at Riverside Plaza, 2nd Street Lofts, and the 1993 building are private lots. They have no public use whatsoever, should have no bearing on this proposal in parking in relation to the 124 O'Brien. It's a separate issue. And the extra, I can understand for, but it just isn't in compliant with the W3B3 in my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rita. Appreciate your comments tonight. Doug.
Thank you for hearing us on this issue. Appreciate it. You know, I'm Doug Rhodes, 1655 West Lakeshore Drive, and my office is right just where that car is parked there, on that pull out next to the new building. So I have a very personal interest in the project, and I've discussed it with the owners and some of the issues that I've had from day one. I pretty much agree with everything everybody said. My big issue is that if it was 4 units, the parking wouldn't be a problem. And my issue is the backing out on that alley. It's a serious safety hazard. And other than that, you can't really say much about it. So I think, once we set a precedent in that district, changing that character, it was an old town district that has certain character. Once we change that and start approving all these large condo projects, it is zoned WR4, and if we stick to that, there wouldn't be a problem with this project, and we would have saved us all a lot of time. But I think because of the nature of what's happening in the community, we're all being pressured to produce more, income on these small properties, and that's, I mean, we're just having to deal with it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Doug. Mike, comments tonight?
Hello, Mark, been in CD 282. We've been here before, and Rich, I just want to say you kind of hit it on the nose. On the parking issue here, it's pretty serious. Second Street Lofts has adequate park. We can back in, back out, go down the alley. It's flat. In the wintertime, this alleyway, what we're talking about, is pretty serious. The snowpack is serious. You can't keep up with it. So when we built 2nd Street Lofts, we came in and we asked for what it was zoned for. And we built what it was zoned for. 139, same thing. It was zoned for what we're building right now. To put a building this big right there, and I'm speaking on behalf of our owners and some of the neighbors. I'm a developer, I'm all for them being successful in the development, but putting 8 units, 10 units where it's at, it's too much. I was gonna buy the lot, I was putting 4 units on it. I had it designed. I didn't end up with it. If I would have known I could put 8 units on this site, I would have paid a lot more money for the lot and I would have got it. So I'm looking at other property in the neighborhood, and just so you know, I would expect the same thing. And I don't know if it's a good idea to set a precedent for someone like me, because I'm gonna expect it. I want this project, I think it's a great project, but I think they need to do what it's zoned for, especially the location it's at. The parking is a very concern on that slope of the alley. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thanks for your comments, Mark. Anyone can approach, just name and address for the record, please.
Hi, I'm not on the list either. My name is Lori Kerwin. I currently reside at 214 2nd Street, right there. That's my deck right on the back. I see that intersection all the time. It's dangerous. It's not safe. I've parked there. My Jeep has a pinstripe down the side of it. It comes to one lane. It come to one lane today. I had to back all the way down to 93 to let the dump truck out and then back up. And I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments.
Hey, my name is Dave Boy. I live at 1040 2nd Street East in Whitefish, and just 6 blocks from my house is where I work, which is in Riverside Plaza. And I've been in that office in different spots within that building for 10 years. I think it's a great spot. I love Riverside Plaza. I also know the applicant over the years, doing a lot of different things. So just to be clear, you won't see me at very many of these city council meetings doing this. You guys probably haven't seen me do much since I was on the chamber board. But this one kind of strikes a nerve for me because I really respect the applicants. And so I just want to go over a few things. One, I heard somebody mention, and I think it was the planning person that was addressing all the comments, mentioned that this was a little out of character of the neighborhood, but some of the others were in character. I would disagree. I would say this is totally in character. I mean, what I see is the exact same thing as, I've never met Doug, but what he just described he owns is you got residential and commercial, and it's dense, and that's what this neighborhood's all about. So I think it's within the character of the neighborhood, and I work there. Doesn't concern me at all. There's some comments that were just made about how some people are not satisfied with the zoning, recent developments going from some residential to residential commercial, and that they don't like that, but it seems like it's being approved over and over and over again. And so I don't think it should be a burden on the applicant to get all of a sudden something that isn't being given to everybody else. So what I see is where the majority of the buildings that are being constructed have a combination of residential and commercial use. So as somebody who works down there, this doesn't bother me. In fact, if you come down there in the evening, there's nobody working down there. There's just people, staying in these places. And then if you go down there during the workday, there's people working, and the traffic flow flips. So it's not the same people in the morning. That's what I notice as somebody who works down there. When I come down in the evening, our lot's empty, and there's people. So I feel like the flow is fine. There's a lot of people concerned about what this is going to do to the parking of the 1993 building. That shouldn't be a concern. It's not. They're the ones providing the least parking for the amount of people using that building. So this applicant shouldn't be held to the burden of the fact that they don't have any parking for their building. Their people are often parking in Riverside and walking in and stuff. It's not a big deal to me, but I just noticed that they're raising the biggest concern about it. And as somebody who's been down there for 10 years, I just think that they have a lot of people in that building for the amount of parking that they're providing. So I don't think it should be a legitimate concern to the approval of this project. So I just ask you guys to really think about who's screaming the loudest about this, and to say, of course they don't have any parking, Regarding Riverside Plaza, I mean, we have lots of parking, and Rita patrols that parking lot. And so you can know that if anybody tries to park in Riverside Plaza, they're gonna get confronted by Rita. And so I think you're gonna have a good police force down there, and I wouldn't use that as a reason not to approve this project, because I'm there and I've been confronted by Rita, and I actually occupy the Riverside Plaza parking lot, and I've been told I was in the wrong spot and things like that, which I appreciate. Rita does a good job. So I would just say that if you're worried about their parking, you don't have anything to worry about. I do think it's a beautification of the lot, and I've for years been using this facility at Riverside and wondering what was going to take place on that lot. So I'm really excited that we've got an applicant here who's going to build something nice there. Finally, just to close, when they built the bridge, the Veterans Bridge, I wrote an email in you guys, but the worst I had to do when they took away everything was I had to go up Mill, like maybe to the parking lot that Riverside owns, and park parallel on that street, and that's when they had the whole thing shut down. That was the worst it got during that period of time. So as an occupant of Riverside, I've just not seen parking to be that big a deal. And then finally, I've known the applicants for years. They own some condos that are kind of across the street from, across the alley from Lula's, and then they also, like they said, lived in town here. And these are people that care about the community, and that's again why I'm taking my time this evening to come down and defend them. I feel like some of the people have been just kind of not really been very supportive of something that I think is a fantastic project. So I just really encourage you guys to treat them the way that you've been treating everybody else in the past that have been getting these buildings approved. I think that's a great project. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Hello, City Councilman, City Councilwoman, Mayor, and City Heads. My name is Shay Cordial. I reside at 6003 St. Moritz Drive, Unit H. And I'm here to speak in favor of what the Ostroms are proposing. I've also had the benefit of knowing the Ostroms for a long time, so I'm convinced they'll be very good stewards of the property. In listening at this hearing and researching this, I think they've listened to a lot of concerns that the community has brought forth, I think both in terms of safety and in terms of respect. So I think that the fact that they are pulling the setbacks back, reduced the project to from 8 to 6, increasing the alleyway from 12 feet to 16 feet to make it safer, and that they're providing 2 extra parking spaces to deal with that concern is quite considerate on their part. I also believe that their building seems to be very similar to other new buildings that require the same type of approval process in the area. And so with that, I just wanted to say I support them. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Crystal Cordial, and I live at 6003 St. Moritz Drive, Unit H. I've had, an opportunity to get to know them too, and I know that they have some housing downtown already. And, people that have lived in their houses have, you know, really said how great they are and how much they care about the property that they do, you know, hold accountable for. And I think in this development, they're willing to do what they're willing to do to make things safe. I think having a vacant lot isn't that great, so I think having a project like this would be great. I think, you know, they've added the extra 2 parking stalls as well as the alleyway. I think it's great. I approve. So, thank you.
Thanks, Crystal. Rhonda.
Good evening, Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. The downtown master plan calls for residential above commercial in the B3 district to encourage people to live downtown and keep downtown vibrant and vital. And I completely support that. And the B3 allows 4 residential units on this property. And my experience is that usually the zoning is, for instance, up to 4. So it's not a minimum number, it's a maximum number. And I think it's been hammered out what the capacity is for various properties. And I think one problem we have is that residential is a word with a very loose meaning now, because these are not places where people will live. These are short-term rentals, and you can tell that by looking at the floor plan. And the reduction from 8 2-bedroom to 4 2-bedroom and 2 3-bedrooms only reduced the guest rooms by 2. So this hasn't been a big walk back for the applicant. And obviously they can have 4, and they can call them residential because we haven't defined that properly yet. But beyond that, I think conditioning it to allow more short-term rental guest rooms in this area is going to create a problem all around, because those people aren't really going to know where to park, and they are going to park in everyone else's parking lots, and there won't be adequate time to train them, as you would perhaps a tenant, because they'll come and they'll go and they'll come and they'll go. And I did go online and do a little Airbnb shopping, and the applicants do own 5 Airbnbs in that area right now. And I did do a few drive-arounds early in the morning, and I have noticed that for every guest room there is a car. The 3-bedroom on Lupfer is advertised as sleeps 9, 3-bedroom sleeps 9, sofa sleeper, and I think also a twin bed somewhere. And there are often at least 3 out-of-state cars, and sometimes 4, parked in front of that unit. So I think the behavior that we're seeing for the Airbnbs is that it's sort of a meetup, and friends all drive in, or family members all drive in and meet up, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a product we need in our community to a degree, but we shouldn't let it overwhelm the rest of the community. So if you've got 3 bedrooms with separate baths and a sofa sleeper in the great room, you might get 4 cars. And you can do the math here. There are 14 bedrooms and 6 sofa sleepers. And so I don't know how many cars there will be lying around on a Sunday morning, but there'll be a lot. And I think we have had a lot of conversation in our community already, and we'll be having a lot more about where we find the balance between tourism and the rest of the economy, and how important those economies are. And I think you've heard from an awful lot of business people who are doing business in that area who are not reliant on the tourism economy, and they're saying this is going to impact them significantly. And so I would say, just permit what's allowed and go with it, and look at cleaning up some of your other regulations. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Further public testimony on this item? Further public comments? Not seeing any, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for motion or discussion. I already closed the public hearing. I apologize. Did you have something you'd like to address from an individual that commented? If it's all right with the council, I will allow Chris to respond to comments.
Yeah, I apologize, Chris Ostrom, 10 Brewer Way in Kalispell. I thought you automatically asked me if I wanted to come back up. I apologize.
Quite right.
So just a couple of brief comments. You know, we actually totally agree with a couple of the comments from the neighbors that this could be, you know, more bedrooms, but the counter side that we've tried to avoid is that there would be a lot less parking, right? So again, it could be 4 condos with more bedrooms with only 4 parking spots, or entirely commercial with no parking spots. So again, we feel that 8 parking spots with 2 extra provide what's needed as far as additional parking to kind of alleviate the parking concern. And I like Mark a lot. He's been very nice to us when we've had conversations. But something that he mentioned about, well, the Second Street Lofts building didn't have to do this process, or the 139 project across the street to the other way that has 9 units didn't have to go through this process. From what we understand, and even talking to the planners at the city, obviously that did have to go through the process. From the council minutes on December 7th and 2015, there was a consideration of a request by Second Street Lots for a conditional use permit in order to develop a mixed-use multifamily project. So not that that's really a big deal, but just to kind of point out that the 18-unit building next door went through the same process, as well as the 9-unit building across the street the other direction. And lastly, you know, I know one of the biggest concerns by you guys, by us as the potential owners and the neighbors, is the east-west alleyway. And all we can really say is we're trying to widen it as much as possible. We've reduced the building off of the setback to provide additional paved surface, and then the size of the parking spots are the same as any standard parking spots, right? Like the parking garage here, or just in other areas for parking. So as far as trying to keep that clear in the winter, all I can say is we will do our best, right? We can help contribute to snow plowing efforts, and I'm sure Natasha will send me up here either with a shovel or a snow plow or a snow blower to try to help keep that clear, and we can do our best to try to keep that as safe as possible. We understand that absolutely is a legit concern. You know, of course, our opinion is that shouldn't deny this entire project from happening, and we're trying to provide, on one hand, we have a sloped alleyway. On the other hand, we're trying to provide additional parking to alleviate that parking concern. So I understand that concern, and we will absolutely do our best with help and collaboration with the neighbors to try to keep that as safe as possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
With that comment, we will close the public hearing formally. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to recess for about 7 minutes. We'll reconvene at 9:10. on. So we'll reconvene, and we're back to item 6B on our agenda. We've closed the public hearing, we've taken public comment, and now we're back to the council. I would appreciate a motion so that we can begin discussions on this matter. Katie.
I would move to approve conditional use permit, WCUP 18-05, a conditional use permit to develop a mixed-use building with 6 residential units located on 124 O'Brien Avenue, zoned WB3.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Hennon. Katie, would you like to speak to your motion?
I would, briefly, and I'm sure that there will be more counselors who will jump in as well. I don't know which side they will be on, however. This is, again, a tough vote. Yep, I can. Again, this is a tough vote. Can you hear me now? Good. Thanks. I understand that that the neighbors have concern about impacts to their neighborhood, impacts in terms of short-term rental, how many cars you will or will not have. But looking at previous history of development within this area and what it is zoned for, and what could actually be passed just without going through a conditional use permit and the amount of traffic that would go through. If it was built lot line to lot line commercial, you would have far more commercial traffic running through an area, and I believe, in my opinion, that you would actually have more detriment to public safety. Furthermore, I do believe that the applicant came forward with an application that was far more beneficial to the entire neighborhood, and therefore we should approve.
Thanks, Katie. Richard.
I have a question for Bailey, if I could.
Please.
Yes.
Thanks, Bailey.
Can you hear me?
What, if any, is the community benefit requirement under the CUP?
There is no community
none.
benefit
That's
requirement.
What I thought. Okay, I just needed that clarification. Thanks.
At our recess, I did ask Bailey for some clarification on the floor plan for the 3rd story. Her response was that essentially it's going to mirror the 2nd floor, although it's going to be on the 3rd floor, more suite types, but it's going to be 2 bedrooms, opening to a great room with a common kitchen. So that's my understanding for the 3rd floor site layout, correct? Okay. Further comments or discussion on the motion? You like a few minutes to deliberate?
Could I just think about this?
For a couple?
I
Yes,
need
please.
a little bit of think time here for a
You
second.
bet.
Craig's not here, but a question. If the alley, if anybody can, maybe David, you could help. If the alley is reconstructed to city standards, does that include curb and gutter? Does anybody know?
I don't think a curb and gutter would be required in an alley.
Not an alley.
Okay. Even for drainage, if that becomes an issue?
I mean, they have to develop an engineered stormwater plan for the site, but I don't think I've ever seen
No, I don't.
curb and gutter in an alleyway. In
I don't
Whitefish.
either, but most of our alleys aren't quite that steep either.
Correct.
So, okay.
Bailey.
I was just going to point out, it's 3 bedrooms on the 3rd floor, but it's 2 units. So I think you said 2 units with 2 bedrooms. It's 2 units, but they have 3 bedrooms.
Okay.
So that just
And
Thank
a
you.
common kitchen.
With leading to 1 common area and 1 common kitchen, correct?
yes, 1 kitchen, 1 common. I think that's the confusion, is people are calling them lockouts. They're not a lockout unit. They are 1 unit, 1 condo unit. Now, granted, you could claim the same thing with a single-family house down Columbia Avenue. People can rent rooms. I mean, they could own their single-family house and rent out bedrooms and have roommates, I mean, that's the same thing, but they are not lockout units. They do not have individual kitchens. They are bedrooms with individual bathrooms, but they are one unit is what we look at for this purpose. So just making that point.
Thanks, Billy.
Point of clarification, Bailey again, please. There were several comments about building or approving as zoned, and the discussion on if it was pure commercial, which would be zoned, I mean, that would
Commercial.
be permitted,
Mhm.
and that would require no parking spaces
Mhm.
whatsoever. On the other hand, as zoned, if there is housing associated with it, it would require 2 spaces per...
Only on the ground floor.
Only on the ground floor.
Only on the ground floor requires 2 spaces. I think some of it is the confusion is there is no density requirement. Normally for R2 zoning, as a great example, in order to have 2 units, you have to have 7,200 square feet. We have a density calculation. If you have 20 acres, you get so many units for a single family house. There's so much acreage for each one. The problem with the B3, there is no density requirement. The parking requirements are really what makes the density requirements. If you could fit 9 units and the parking for 9 units, you could do 9. I mean, that's the thing. It's only 4 units or less doesn't require a CUP. So even if they could only have enough parking for 2 units, that would be their limiting factor. So it's not a density requirement, which is similar to our other zones that do have a minimum square footage that's needed for a unit. It's the parking standards that really dictate how many units you could get on, because they need 2 spaces for a ground floor or 1 space for each unit above the ground floor.
So if we approve this,
Mhm.
and then the proponent said, yeah, that just isn't going to work for me, I want to go back to 100% commercial.
Mhm.
They can do that.
Yep, no CUP would be needed. This CUP would basically go away.
It would go away?
Yeah.
I
it would-
suppose because they hadn't used it for 18 months.
Because they hadn't used it. If they don't use it within the 18 months of approval, it goes away
Right.
and so they wouldn't need, if they wanted to do that, all commercial, they wouldn't need anything. If they did commercial with 4 units, they wouldn't need a CUP as well. It's really those 2 extra units that require the conditional use permit.
Okay,
So.
got it.
Katie.
And to put it in perspective, correct, so if they were to have commercial on the bottom, 4 units, they would not need a CUP.
Mhm.
And say hypothetically, each unit had 3 bedrooms,
Mhm.
that would put 12 bedrooms, but only 4 parking spots needed.
Mhm.
So that puts it in perspective as to what they are utilizing for parking spaces versus how many units they have within this permit. To what
These units have so many bedrooms.
I guess the best thing is even a single family house on Columbia, or I use Columbia Avenue because it's the best example I can give for the downtown residential area, Columbia, Kalispell, Summers. Somebody builds a brand new house, tears one down, they only need 2 parking spaces for their residential unit, and 1 if they had an accessory apartment, for example. They could have 6 bedrooms in it. The bedrooms aren't our defining number for parking spaces, so. That's just, I know it's not the same example because you have downtown and, you know what I mean, but it's kind of that's just the example kind of the best one I can think of, so.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Further discussion or questions for staff? Ready to vote? Further comments? All those in favor of the motion to approve, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Michelle? We will move on to what will be item 6C, ordinance 18-25, an ordinance request by the City of Whitefish amending zoning regulations in Whitefish City Code, Title 11, Chapter 2L, in order to effectively prohibit residential short-term rentals in the WB2 Secondary Business District, and Chapter 9 regarding definitions, and this will be on a first reading. Dave.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So last winter, we did some minor amendments to the special provisions chapter on the short-term rental regulations. And when we did that, the council made an amendment to that took the WB2 out of the list of zones where it mentioned that short-term rentals were allowed. However, that didn't change the code to effectively prohibit them in the WB2. So this zoning text amendment makes some modifications to the WB3 general business district, as well as some of the definitions of hospitality and entertainment, as well as hotel, so that short-term rentals would continue to be allowed in the WB3, but would be prohibited in the WB2. Currently, the B2 does not allow any residential use outside of a planned unit development, but because it lists hotels, motels, and other hospitality and entertainment uses, short-term rentals could be currently allowed in an existing dwelling unit or a new PUD. So we consider short-term rentals a residential use. It is the use of what we consider a dwelling unit or a residence. Historically, in business zones where there's been hotels, motels, and other hospitality uses, we've allowed them, which includes the B2 and the B3. Various types of lodging is pretty inclusive, and we've considered short-term rentals to be part of that. This change, again, we're amending the B3 to add some language in there to make it clear that short-term rentals are allowed. While we're not actually changing the language in the B2, this text amendment effectively makes that change where the short-term rentals would not be allowed in the B2. So we're modifying the definition of hotel. Currently, if there's 5 or more short-term rental units in a commercially zoned building, we've considered that as a hotel or motel and not required them to go through the short-term rental registration process. However, that's going to change with this amendment. If it's a residential unit, whether it's used long-term or short-term in the downtown, it would have to get registered as a short-term rental. And then if it's under, we added some language about whether it's under single management, just to sort of clarify what the definition of hotel is. So in summary, in the B3, residential use is permitted in the residential permitted and the conditional uses, we're clarifying that to include residential short-term rentals. Again, I think it's page 153 of your packet is the staff report. So under permitted uses, it mentions single-family, duplex, triplex, and fourplex multifamily units in the B3. We're adding including residential short-term rentals. And then under conditional uses, same thing, multifamily dwellings in excess of 4 dwelling units, including residential short-term rentals. And then in the definition section, which is the alternative changes that we're doing, there are the extra changes. Under hospitality and entertainment, it's currently defined as uses catering to the traveling public or the commercial, recreational, or leisure needs of visitors and residents alike, including hotels, motels, and various types of lodging accommodations. And then we're adding in parentheses, with the exception of residential short-term rentals, to make it clear that it's not included in that definition of hospitality and entertainment. And then under the definition of hotel, it's defined as a building, and we're adding or buildings under single management advertised as a hotel and containing 5 or more individual sleeping rooms. And then at the end of that definition, we're adding residential dwelling units used as short-term rentals do not qualify as a hotel, even if there are 5 or more under one ownership in a single commercial building. Worked on this definition, ran it through Angie. She thinks it's functional and that it'll prohibit short-term rentals in the B2 henceforward once this is adopted. Making it, one of the findings that have to be made is zoning regulations must be made in accordance with the growth policy. This particular amendment will support affordable housing by eliminating short-term rentals in the B2 zone. Under the growth policy recommended action number 3, it says the city shall review its codes and ordinances for additional opportunities to support and provide for affordable housing. As you know, the WB2 was identified in our strategic housing plan as a place where short-term rentals probably shouldn't happen, where long-term affordable housing would be the best location in the city for additional multifamily and affordable housing. And so this helps facilitate that. Under promote public health, safety, and general welfare, they'll do that in the sense that every short-term rental in the downtown in the B3 would be inspected by the fire marshal with these changes. And then as far as promotion of compatible urban growth, this will do that by promoting long-term residential housing in a mixed-use environment rather than transient housing for visitors. Hate to use that word transient. It seems to be a stickler lately, but finding number 8, this criterion as far as suitability of the property for particular uses, it's not particular to a property. However, the B2 zoning district has been identified for more long-term affordable housing, as I mentioned. And it does encourage the most appropriate use of land within that district to be long-term housing for our community. And as far as the historical use patterns, the recent trend of pulling long-term housing off the market in favor of transient rentals was considered, and these amendments do address that in the B2 zone. So staff does support these recommendations. It did go to the Whitefish City Planning Board. We reviewed that at the public hearing. We had 2 members of the public speak. Dan Cutforth spoke opposing the changes. He thought it made sense to do short-term rentals along the Whitefish River in the B2. Rhonda Fitzgerald also spoke in favor of the amendments. The planning board considered those comments and the findings, and they unanimously recommended approval of the amendments. And again, we continue to recommend approval. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer that.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave on his staff report? Not seeing any. We did advertise for what will be ordinance 18-25, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony this evening on this item? Mary.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, P.O. Box 3094, Kalispell. As you know, I have expressed concerns about trying to get the WB2 to not allow short-term rentals in previous applications before you, so I was pleased to see this effort come forward. I was not out of town at the planning board, so I did not submit comments there. But I am concerned that this still doesn't close the door. While you've removed WB2 from your text of your short-term rentals, and now here this ordinance says that it, in order to effectively prohibit short-term rentals in the WB2, however, it only addresses changes in the WB3, and the only way you have residential in the WB2 is through a PUD, and it doesn't address not allowing residential short-term rentals in a PUD. And that needs to somehow either be integrated into this ordinance. I'm not exactly sure how it gets done, but the Eagle Lake condominium project that came before you ultimately was approved because of the language that you're changing tonight, which would have classified it as a hotel, or potentially could have come back as a hotel, but it still could have been approved just as a short-term rental, because short-term rentals are not prohibited within a PUD, and in fact PUDs allow residential in almost all of the districts. And so that continues to be a problem, and I don't want to see us back here thinking we've solved this issue without really addressing that. I would also point out just a minor technicality that your ordinance points out that you're changing 11-2L-2, but you're also proposing to change 11-2L-3, and so your ordinance should probably reflect that. In that regard, and particularly given the discussion that you just had on the prior application before you, I would suggest that you consider making in the WB3 short-term rentals a conditional use only and not a permitted use. That way, it gives you some ability to address the parking and transportation issues that are particular to that use being a short-term rental. So I think that covers what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary. Rhonda, any comments tonight on this item?
I appreciate you tackling this, and as I said at the planning board, I appreciate the effort, and of course I'm alarmed that it didn't actually close the door, because obviously people would be doing PUDs in the B2. So, I mean, I would like to hear from the planning staff. I mean, that's not my role exactly, but I support it if it's actually prohibiting short-term rentals in the B2, but if it's not, and it's just something we think it does, and then later it'll come around and there they all are out there, that would be really tragic. So I guess I hope that you all will ask the planning staff and legal counsel if this in fact closes the door on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Further public testimony on this item? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for questions or a motion or a combination of both. And I guess I will start, Dave and Angie. I know this was vetted by both departments. To Mary's question regarding residential PUDs in the WB2, will this essentially close the door on that?
Well, anytime you ask for a planned unit development, you're allowed to ask for uses that are compatible with that particular development. So any zone could potentially ask for short-term rentals as a compatible use. They could ask for that, but it wouldn't be one of the uses that's by right within that zoning district. Now, they'd have to make a case why that was needed in that particular development, whether it's the B2 or the WR2 or any other zone that someone did a planned unit development. But this eliminates it from the list of permitted uses that's in that zoning district. Now, one of the things that we're going to do, we were going to bundle this with some of the changes with affordable housing, but we wanted to kind of fast track this. As we're adding multifamily as a permitted and or conditional use in the B2. So that, residential right now, the only way you can have it is through a PUD. However, you guys have the ultimate discretion on what uses are allowed. It has to go through the planning board and the city council to get any approval with a PUD. And obviously we've made it known that, short-term rentals aren't gonna fly probably in the WB2 unless there's some really compelling reason. So, I mean, anybody can ask for something with a PUD. I don't think we could legally put language in there excluding that use without amending the PUD ordinance again, because that's where it lists in there the uses permitted in that zoning district and any other uses that can be justifiably, that someone hasn't thought of yet. It leaves it open so that people can come up with things that we may not have listed in our zoning code, but because it's a planned unit development, it's a cohesive thing, somehow that a use that fits into that development that may not have been thought of, which gives you the discretion of approving certain things. Yeah, and as far as, again, we're going to add multifamily in the B2 as a use. So one of the, upcoming, when we add our, inclusionary zoning requirement, that's part of the strategic housing plan was to add multifamily as a permitted use in the B2. So it won't be any different than any other zone once that goes in there.
Okay. Thanks for clarification. And then do we also need to reference 11-2-L-3, or is the ordinance accurately reflective of the appropriate code?
Sorry, I gotta lift the ordinance up. Yeah, under section 3 of the ordinance, we can make that change, but it comes back at the next meeting.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Questions, discussion, or can I have a motion, please? Ryan.
I move to approve ordinance number 18-25, an ordinance request by the City of Whitefish amending zoning regulations in Whitefish City Code Title 11, Chapter 2L, in order to effectively prohibit residential short-term rentals in the WB2 Secondary Business District and Chapter 9 regarding definitions.
Thank you, Ryan. And does that include, at the second reading, the amendment to 11-2-11-3 or
Yes.
L-3?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Fury. Further discussion on the motion? Frank?
Comfort me some more, David. How do I agree with your initial analysis that we have made it known that even under a PUD, we would not entertain short-term rentals. Why would I not include such a reference in this amendment or in this ordinance at this time to make it, as you said, abundantly clear and known and articulated, so that we don't have to worry about it being a discretionary item because we know we don't want it?
Well, I mean, when you look at zoning, you know, your uses are permitted in the zone. Let's take the WB1, for example. That's our neighborhood commercial zone. Does not allow hotels or motels in that zoning district. Does not allow residential use. Similar to the B2, except that B2 allows hotels and motels. But in that zone, you know, somebody came forward to us and asked to do a PUD to allow short-term rentals. We would tell them there's no way that that would get approved. I mean, it's not a listed use in that zone. Any other zone, somebody could ask for the short-term rentals if they, you know, if they wanted to do it, they could try to apply, but we would dissuade them and let them know that that's no way that's going to happen. I don't know why we would single out the B2 to add some special language, being discretionary about what's happening with a PUD of what they can or can't apply for. It just seems like we're picking and choosing that particular use to add it in there because of some fear in the future but it could happen in any zone. I don't know. We'd want to add that to every zoning district, or else put specific language in the PUD ordinance. But then, you know, what if somebody wanted to do a PUD in a resort business or a resort residential? So you can't effectively prohibit short-term rentals because there's zones that do allow them.
Right.
I just think it's being overly fearful of the process because it's not going to be allowed use, and it's clear that it's not allowed use in that zone. I mean, Angie can weigh in her opinion if she wants.
I agree with Dave. I mean, I don't know how you fit that within the confines of this ordinance or the PUD ordinance, but I agree with Dave. They can certainly ask for it, but I think Dave's correct. They'd encourage them that you're not going to get short-term rentals, and if that's where council, you know, chooses to go, I don't see it being approved. I don't see a practical way to weave it into the PUD chapter or to weave it into this ordinance that prohibits them from even asking from it as part of a PUD.
Comforted?
Marginally.
Further questions or discussion from the council? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. We'll move on to item 6D, which will be resolution 18-28, something I believe we do pretty much annually when we adopt our fiscal year budget. We do have a resolution amending the 2018 fiscal year annual budget to increase appropriations in 5 funds of the city, and this is on page 162 of your packet. Dana.
Oops, sorry. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Coming in with a bang tonight. We have a lot of budget talk, but this is about FY18. My staff report is on page 164 of the packet. We do have 5 funds that do need budget amendments completed. The general fund, we are requesting a budget amendment of $39,397. In the winter, the Wave building was damaged significantly by snow and ice, and because that is a city building, we do hold the property insurance for that building. A claim was filed, and an insurance payment was made for that claim, and so it just passed through the city. So we didn't expect that, and that did cause us to go over budget within the general fund. But we have the unanticipated revenues to offset that expenditure. The fire and ambulance fund, we did see a significant increase in adjustments needed according to Medicare and Medicaid for our ambulance billing. So this is almost really not an expenditure that we're sending out cash. It's actually just a reduction in the revenue that we had expected. So we do have a $240,000 amendment for that fund. We have the Commercial Lighting District Fund. You were aware of that as we talked about the LED lighting upgrade, taking our commercial district up, getting the LEDs complete, excuse me, so that we could take advantage of the larger rebates that were currently offered by Flat Electric. The Parkland Acquisition and Development Fund had a minor additional cost for the Baki Reserve Improvement Project of about $6,500. And then the Whitefish Trail Construction Fund, we have $95,000 of expenditures that would need to be amended. And that is due to the project just moving forward quicker and the funding being available. So that again is covered by unanticipated revenues. Staff recommends that the City Council approve Resolution 18-28, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Whitefish amending the fiscal year 2018 annual budget to increase appropriations in the 5 funds. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Dana. Any questions for Dana? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public.
I'm poised for the public hearing.
There's no one here. We did advertise for a public hearing, what will be our own ordinance 18-28. Are there any public comments this evening? Not seeing any, I'll close the public
Mr.
hearing.
Mayor, point of order, is it not ordinance 18-29, actually?
It's 28, if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken.
you're right, okay, 28 was the potential, okay, you're right, thank you.
Think so? And I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. Because it was denied.
Gotcha.
And I'll turn it back to Richard for discussion or a motion.
Oh, I have quite a discussion. No, just kidding, Heidi. Won't keep you any longer than necessary. I move to approve Resolution 18-28, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Whitefish, Montana, amending the 2018 fiscal year annual budget to increase appropriations in 5 funds of the city.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second, please.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. And that carries unanimously. Michelle, which brings us quickly on to item 6E, which will be our FY19 budget. We'll be holding a public hearing to receive public input on the FY19 budget and fixing the tax levy and assessments. I'm going to go ahead and ask Dana to walk us through the 10 resolutions, which will be 18-29 through resolution 18-38. She'll give us a brief overview of those individual resolutions, and then we'll hold one public hearing to both adopt our FY19 budget as well as fixing the tax levy and assessments. So with that said, I will turn it over to our finance director, Dana.
All right. I'm happy to present you with the FY19 budget today. It's found on page 172 of your packet. As you know, we have held 2 budget work sessions, and the preliminary budget was adopted during the June 18th City Council meeting, so that operations could continue into the beginning of FY19, starting July 1. So within the packet, you do have a list of all the different resolutions, including our street assessments and our property tax levy. But I'd like to give you just a little bit of information, and as we go through here, we can touch on each one individually. So on page 188 of the packet, I'd like you to look at that first. It's our tax levy form, and it will help you walk through the first, the number 2, which is approving the final budget and the property taxes, so the second and third resolution. So during the preparation of the FY19 budget, the property tax valuations determined by the Department of Revenue were projected to grow 3.2%. This projection took into consideration only newly taxable property, including annexations and new construction, that was complete by the end of December 17. We received our final figures on July 30th that resulted in an increase of only 2.18%. So I reached out to the Department of Revenue to see where the differences were, and all annexations were accounted for, but the new construction valuations are lagging behind about 2 to 3 years. While we had a difference of about 1% in projections, many communities around Montana have reported unexpected decreases in valuations, including tax increment districts. Our tax increment district, however, did have a growth in the valuation of 7.48%. So good news for us, but there are communities that are struggling right now. If you haven't heard about Missoula, you'll see it all over the news. So while we did have a 1% difference, we did have to go through the budget and try to figure out how to handle that. However, at year end, we did receive our final property tax relief figures from resort tax. The collections from FY18 resulted in not only the 25% required, but additional relief due to collections exceeding the budget. So the total amount of property tax relief for fiscal year 19 is $1,370,000 roughly, or the equivalent of 54.056 mils. So on that page on 188, you would be able to see that we have a minus 54.056 mils within the resort tax relief column. So to maintain a balanced budget with some minor growth in cash balance of $40,000, the general levy was increased by 3.613 mils, and the group health insurance levy, or the permissive medical levy, was increased by 3 mils. Both of those have a limitation of 125.6 mils and 29.99 mils. So we still are under our maximum mill levy. These increases were fully offset by the increased property tax relief. So the total property tax revenue increase is limited to the 2.18% of newly taxable value. What that means is that when you look at just the property tax levies themselves, homeowners would see a net zero increase in their tax bill. So while the property tax levy resulted in no increase to the average property owner, increases in the city's maintenance assessments will actually increase the property tax bill. So as we move through each of the maintenance, the maintenance assessments, we can go through each one individually. It would appear that the street maintenance district, number 1, would be the first one. In that maintenance district, we did increase the assessment 3.1% in the fiscal year 19 budget to keep up with the annual CPI. That costs the average homeowner of a $350,000 home 50-foot front footage. And really the assessments are based on front footage, so the $350,000 is really gonna apply to your property taxes more so. But the 50 feet of front footage would result in $3.78 increase per year. So a very minor increase there. The next one that we have listed is the Parkland and Greenway Maintenance District. That one was increased 6% to keep up with the annual CPI of 3.1%, plus an additional increase to cover, the capital needs, the capital improvement needs of the department, including equipment. That increase to a homeowner with the front footage of 50 feet would be approximately $2.86 per year. The next assessment is the Stormwater Improvement and Maintenance District. That would be the assessment that we have the largest increase in. In 2011, the fiscal year 2011, the assessment was significantly reduced as a result of the recession to help reduce the burden on property tax or property owners. And it was reduced from $72 to $12.53, and it has not been adjusted since. So for fiscal year 19, the assessment has increased $50 for an individual home, and that's a set rate per parcel. That increase allows us to transfer the costs that were in 2011 reallocated to the streets department. So by bringing in by increasing the assessment, stormwater assessment will now pay for the personnel and the supplies and equipment needed to maintain our stormwater systems. That does free up cash within the streets fund, and we've been able to add $50,000 to increased plowing for our alleys, as we've heard from citizens that that's a needed improvement. And so the Public Works Department plans to contract with a local vendor to have that done. The next two are oh, I might have skipped one. Where is that one? Oh, I skipped the lighting, my bad. That was after the streets. The lighting also increases by just the CPI for the year of 3.1% to keep up with the cost of living and the cost of supplies and personnel. So in total, an average property owner with a home valued at $350,000 and 50 feet of front footage would have a tax bill of about increase in their tax bill of about $4.75 per month. So when we look at what those mean to a property owner, what are they getting for that? Obviously, we have a partial year of a full-time IT person that will help us improve security of city data and systems. We have a housing coordinator budgeted as of April 1st to start helping with the implementation of the Whitefish housing plan and work with developers on affordable housing projects. We have a part-time customer service clerk to assist in the increasing demands of the cashier and information desk and the finance department. This includes collecting utility bills, payments, business licensing, general inquiries, and financial reporting. We'll be able to provide extended hours for boat inspections to protect Whitefish Lake from aquatic invasive species at both City Beach and State Park, and improve the city's urban forestry program. We will also complete the LED upgrades for the street lights in the residential district, so future operating and maintenance costs are reduced. And finally, as I'd mentioned before, we'll improve the timeliness of alley snow plowing through a vendor contract. Other increases in expenditures within the FY19 budget are primarily funded through new grants, increases in the projected charges for services, and a spend down of cash reserve for capital projects. We have a new full-time police officer that is required to backfill, is necessary to backfill a vacancy created by the Internet Crimes Against Children officer who is now working in Kalispell. This, though, has no impact to the budget in that we have the full grant funding for that new position. Improved enforcement of city regulations related to short-term rentals are funded through business licensing fees. Increased contributions to the Whitefish School District from the tax increment district is also impacting the budget when you look at the total amount of increased expenditures. The amount that the city will be providing to the school district has now reached $1.1 million for FY19. Again, we have equipment purchases for the wastewater treatment plant. That's also a significant impact to the budget for capital projects. That is financed and budgeted for a $2 million loan from the state SRF program. With the final consumer price index figures, or what we refer to as CPI, is 3.1%, and the 2.18% increase in taxable value. All non-union employees and union employees will receive a 4% raise, which we've had indicated that's the new ceiling for raises for city employees, thereby limiting CPI to 2% instead of 3.1%. We have not reached an agreement with the fire union at this time for fiscal year 19, but we are continuing negotiations with them. The FY19 budget does reflect a 4% raise for fire union members, but they did seem amenable to that limit, and that was already in their current contract. So health insurance costs also increased 3.4% for the city, and liability and property insurance also had a significant increase for FY19. Really what happened was we had claims have increased during the 5-year period they're looking at, and then they reduced the retro payment for the city by $60,000. So that's the one thing I hadn't told you guys, but it was included on the list, and I think I skipped it last time, but that was a pretty big hit to the budget financially. Although allocated among all departments, it was about it was more than $60,000. It was probably like close to $90,000 that we had to find. Okay, so with an increase in expenditures for fiscal year 19 and keeping increases for the average property tax or property owners below $5 per month, the total cash as a percentage of budget has decreased to 14.76%, which you can see on the budget summary on page 187. FY18's budget was 15.24%. While this is not ideal, it is mostly due to the one-time increase in capital expenditures for the Parks and Rec Department for the equipment needed for the urban forestry program, so the bucket truck. I would like to thank the City Council, City Manager Hammett, Department Directors, Kenny Hopkins, Venice Woodbeck, and all other city staff for their contribution to the FY19 budget. Their input and help are vital in wrapping up another successful budget season. So on behalf of all staff, we recommend the adoption of the FY19 budget and approval of the related resolutions. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Dana. Thanks very much, Dana, and I would like to thank you because I know you worked tirelessly on behalf of all the departments to prepare the budget for our adoption this evening. So thanks very much from the council. Any questions for Dana? Richard.
Is there any follow-up in a way to, because of the insurance claim, the city to put in a plan in place to reduce that exposure? In other words, was this a one-off, or was this just, do we need to have a revision of our safety plan?
You know, at first, I would say the majority of the increase in our insurance was actually due to them reducing the retro payment of $60,000. They use a mod factor for our liability insurance, which is interesting, and it's also based on our salaries, so whatever our payroll costs are. So as our payroll goes up, our costs go up. But they only did a 1% increase in rates, so when I had projected the figures in FY19, it wasn't really there. You know, the mod factor went up. Looks like we dropped off a really good year of claims of like $240, and then we've added on a significant year. Still, though, I don't think that that's what's causing the increase, and so I would say it's really that we did not anticipate the reduction in the retro that we've been getting for the past 3 years, of about 120,000 reduced to 60,000.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's all. Thanks.
Further questions for Dana? We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be adoption of resolutions 18-29 through 18-38, and we will hold that public hearing now. Anyone wishing to provide testimony? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and I would take one motion for all 10 resolutions. Richard.
I'll let somebody else have the pleasure.
Katie.
I've done that before.
Oh, I mean, I can do it. I was just going to second.
Oh.
Sure, why not? I will move to approve resolutions 18-29 through 18-38 regarding to the FY19 budget, tax levy, and assessments, as just stated with our public hearing.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Hildner. Further discussion?
Katie, do you want to say anything before you made the motion?
Sure, I can say something. Yes. Well, yes, Richard, thank you. Thank you to staff, Dana and Adam, for working so diligently with this budget. I think that council really wanted to direct staff to make sure that we didn't have large impacts this year fiscally to any of the residents. As we have our property tax relief, we voted not to increase the mill levy, and you see that reflected. I'm very happy with where we ended up with our very basic less than $5 a month raise per household, basically, in a property owner. And I think that that's something that I want to applaud you and thank you for working to keep those assessments down for us.
Thanks, Katie.
I would echo what Katie had to say. Thank you very much for an excellent budget proposal and a final budget. It really illustrates the importance of our resort tax in order to keep property taxes down, and it's just, I think, the envy of many communities of our size and smaller across the state. So thanks for job well done.
Thanks, Richard. Further discussion or comments? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and those resolutions pass unanimously. Michelle? We will move on to item 7A, which is consideration of approval of an application from David and Catherine Jenkins for a Whitefish Lake and Lakeshore variance located at 1130 Birch Point Drive to reconstruct an existing non-conforming deck partially located within the LPZ. David.
Sorry, I was just going to tell Michelle I don't have anything up for this one, so sorry. So this is the applicant is proposing to replace and reconstruct a portion of an existing non-conforming deck that is located within the Lakeshore Protection Zone. The residential structure is actually angled on the property so that only a small portion of the deck actually extends into the Lakeshore Protection Zone. The definition of reconstruction prohibits the replacement of a non-conforming structure, and so the applicant is requesting a minor variance in order to do the project. The portion of the deck within the Lakeshore Protection Zone is kind of triangle shaped. It's approximately 11 feet 4 inches wide at the largest point, 35 feet and 4 inches long at the furthest point. It's approximately 155 square feet, and I actually took that off of their previous Lakeshore application. They had given me an estimate that was a little bit smaller, and so I went with the larger number in the calculations just to make sure that they did in fact meet all the criteria and things like that. So they're actually requesting a variance. There's two sections of the Lakeshore Protection Regulations that they would need a variance for in order to complete the project. One is that we outright prohibit construction or installation, specifically decks, in the Lakeshore Protection Zone. And then the definition of reconstruction itself. So the Lakeshore regulations, they do permit repairs and maintenance to non-conforming structures that can be done without a permit. However, if the repairs include replacement of structural or foundation components, then it kicks in that requirement for a permit. Additionally, dwelling units that are existing can be remodeled. Those also do not need a permit. And don't have to be brought into compliance with the criteria. If it's just an interior remodel, we don't typically see anything other than a building permit. But since the applicant is proposing to completely reconstruct the deck, they need a minor variance for the project. So the subject property has 100.66 feet of lakeshore frontage. They're eligible for 805 approximately square feet of constructed area. There is an existing, as I said, the existing deck, which is 155. Again, I took the bigger number from the previous application that was verified by staff at that time. There's an existing dock that's 400 square feet that was approved in 2003, an existing walkway approximately 48 square feet, and existing stairs that are approximately 24 square feet. So the total amount of constructed area, including the existing deck, is 627. So they are within their allowance for the property using the larger number. So the existing residential structure, it was a triplex building. It was actually converted into 3 condo units. It was constructed in 1975, according to the state CAMA data. So basically right before the start of the Lakeshore regulations were brought into creation. The deck is the primary access to the units on the second floor of the building. They're also proposing to install some new stairs off the deck, but these would be located outside of the Lakeshore Protection Zone, so no additional square footage. The deck's not being expanded in the Lakeshore Protection Zone. The existing lot is a non-conforming lot. It's zone WR2. Not only does the WR2 not permit triplexes, but the lot is not large enough for any residential to comply with the required setbacks. So that basically the whole building is non-conforming. They wouldn't be allowed to put it back without a zoning variance if they were to do that. So due to the non-conforming lot size and shape, the existing location of the residential structure, strict enforcement of the regulations would constitute a hardship and potentially limit access for the units on the second floor. So due, again, as I said, to the location of the existing unit, there's no reasonable alternatives which would comply with the standards of the Lakeshore regulations. The applicant could repair smaller portions of the deck over time with and without permits, but this could potentially cause larger impacts to the lakeshore. Additionally, it also makes issuing lakeshore permits and building permits difficult if it's just kind of piecemealed over time. So the repairs, reconstruction of the existing deck would not materially diminish water quality, fish habitat, wildlife habitat, create a public nuisance or safety hazard. They're not altering the characteristics of the shoreline, and they're not altering any visual impacts that the subject property may have from the lake, since it's going to be in the exact same location and look very similar to the existing deck. Staff recommended approval of the Lakeshore permit application. It was presented at the Lakeshore Protection Committee meeting on August 8th. They considered the request. The applicant was present at the meeting and did answer questions. I did include the draft minutes for your for your packet as well. Following staff's presentation, the Lakeshore Committee did vote to recommend approval of the application 5-0, and Cole Abel did abstain from it. So, and I can answer questions.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey on the variance requests? Not seeing any.
Okay.
Motion. Andy.
I would move to approve WLV 18-W11 with the proposed findings of fact for approval and the 11 attached conditions as recommended to us by the Lakeshore Protection Committee.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and that's unanimous. Michelle? Thanks, Bailey. That brings us on to item 8A, which will be our own ordinance 18-26, an emergency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Whitefish, placing a Stage 2 fire restriction within city limits, providing an exception and waiving the second reading with an immediate effective date, and this will be the only reading of this ordinance. Chief Page.
Good evening. Back on August 11th, we had thunderstorms come through the area, and if it wasn't already obvious, we sparked off a couple of wildland fires that are still burning. So being very reactive, on August 20th, the DNRC and the National Forest placed Stage 2 restrictions in place, and I joined them and ordered the city into Stage 2 fire restrictions also. And then per Ordinance 1725 from last year, my order expires tonight's meeting. So staff respectfully recommends that the City Council enacts an emergency ordinance continuing the Stage 2 fire restrictions within the city, waiving the second reading with an immediate effective date.
Thank you, Chief Page. Can we have a motion to that effect, please?
Yeah.
Ryan.
Oh, yikes. I would move to approve ordinance 18-26, an emergency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Whitefish, Montana, placing a Stage 2 fire restriction within city limits, providing an exception, and waiving the second reading with an immediate effective date.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hartman. Further discussion on the motion. Richard.
Just briefly, isn't this something we should do on a permanent basis? Is we gave the chief the authority once. Do we have to renew that every year?
The authority you gave me was to enact one until your next regular meeting. So that is tonight.
Which, I'm fine with that, but it just seems to me that we're going through one extra step that we may not need to. Angie?
Richard, I agree with you, but I think in order to actually enforce Chief Page's order, it's a good idea to have an ordinance on the book.
Okay.
I think we went through this last year.
I think we did too, and here it comes again.
All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and that's unanimous. Michelle. Thanks, Chief Page. We will move on to item 9A, which is the review and possible adoption of our FY19 through FY23 capital improvement program. I spoke with Dana briefly before the meeting began. I think rather than walk through the entire 25-page CIP, which guides our capital improvements for the next 5 years, I've suggested to Dana that she get with Adam and schedule this for a work session with the City Council. I think it's important enough for us to have a thorough understanding of what our 5-year outlook looks like, as well as for the benefit of the public. And considering Adam and Craig aren't here tonight, I would politely suggest that we actually get this scheduled for a work session in the near future. With that said, however, because so much of our FY19 budget is contingent on our capital improvement program, I did let Dana know that we could certainly consider adoption this evening, with the caveat that we will have a work session to dive into the details in the near future. With that said, Dana, did you have anything to add?
Sure. I'll just kind of, I would appreciate a moment. The one thing to know about the capital improvement program is that, this is not an appropriation or approval of a specific project, but rather a planning document for the next 5 years. It communicates to citizens, obviously, and the development community, the city's intent to preserve, improve, and expand facilities. Obviously, this changes based on circumstances and economic factors. one reason why I would like to consider this program tonight is because as we move forward with impact fees, this is one of the bases for calculating impact fees. So this is later than normal during the budget season. Usually we've had this in April, but with unknown figures for the budget, we had to delay approval or presenting you with this capital improvement program. We are required only to adopt it every 2 years. And if memory serves me correct, that would mean this year we aren't required to. So again, if you decide not to take action tonight, we are at least within our rules for impact fees. And the state only requires it every 5 years. So it's just our city code with our impact fees does require it every 2 years. So with that, we can delay this discussion, or I could go over just briefly, summarize what's going on if you'd like. So I'll leave that up to you.
Mr. Mayor, my preference would be, to the extent it doesn't have a dilatory effect on anything else we're doing from a budget perspective, I think I would like to have a work session to evaluate these things before we approve it. My caveat to that is if we need to pass something for pro forma purposes this evening, I could entertain that with the caveat that we have a work session within some certain period of time and that we have an opportunity to amend it after that work session if we decide to reorder some things or change. I don't care which way we go, but I think that's a better process. And so my request is, what's the best process? Dana?
You know, for the CIP, generally you would have adopted this prior to the budget simply because it does identify projects for FY19's budget. So we've used this as a tool, even though you hadn't seen it before, we were already using it for a tool to create our fiscal year 19 budget. That's already set. Basically, you've adopted that budget. So fiscal year 19 is what it is in this program. Really, you're looking at the latter years. So, you know, adopting it now and then having a work session to really go through in detail, and we could amend it. It's a document that's a planning document that can change at any time. So based on the typical process with a budget, I would probably recommend adopting what we have presented to you tonight if you have no objections to it, knowing that we will bring it to you in the next available work session to go through all the projects.
I agree with Dana. I would motion it to that effect and just direct staff to schedule a work session as soon as possible, given other priorities. Would you like to make that motion?
No, you can.
I can't make motions.
Oh, yeah. And I'll second.
We'll need a formal motion to that effect.
I can go ahead and do that. That's going to be, what is that going to be?
It's just item 9.
It's just, okay.
Item 9A.
Any motion you want.
Yeah, make any motion I want. I'm going to go ahead and move that we adopt the fiscal year 19 through fiscal year 23 capital improvement program as presented, and that we also schedule a work session as soon as possible.
Thanks, Andy. Is there a second to the motion?
With the option to modify as needed?
I think that needs to be included,
okay.
But
yeah, it's fine.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously. Michelle? We will stay with Dana for our year-end quarterly financial report for FY18.
Okay. So my report is on page 391 of the packet. I'm going to go through very briefly, assuming you guys have kind of reviewed this already, and I've been keeping you up to date each quarter. But year-end figures came in great. Cash balance has improved among most funds, especially our property tax-supported funds. Some really interesting highlights that I'd like to bring to your attention are the municipal court fines and forfeitures. Those have continued to grow each year, and they finished fiscal year 18 at 140% of the budget. We also collected the collections actually from the prior year were 31% higher. That's one thing that really helped us with our liability insurance issues and the property tax, was being able to increase projected court fines up $100,000 actually from what was budgeted last year. So great job to our prosecuting attorney, police officers responding, issuing citations, I suppose, and then the court for following through. So I don't know that that will continue, obviously, as population and tourism growth continues. I don't see the demand of our police department going down by any means. Resort tax collections were at 109% of the fiscal year 19 budget, and 9% higher than the prior year. Most of this increase was in lodging, but both retail and bars and restaurants saw a pretty strong growth as well, around 6 to 8%. This, of course, allowed for the additional property tax relief we've already discussed tonight. Ambulance service charges did increase over the prior year, 8%, or $109,000. But again, the unfortunate part is a lot of that is written off through Medicare and Medicaid. Those are required write-downs that we really have no control over. We did switch to a new ambulance billing company based out of Seattle. We're hoping that we will have an increase in our collections through that company. And obviously, we all know that building licensing and permits have gone really great this year, and those did continue through the last quarter of the year. Investment earnings, I haven't really ever totaled those up, but we totaled almost $200,000 in investment earnings for fiscal year 18. So that's a great improvement from prior years. We're hoping to continue that into fiscal year 19. All the funds we've discussed that went over budget, everyone else didn't go over budget, so that's good news. Basically, the financial outlook for the city overall, we're continuing to improve our financial condition. The city continues to see stronger returns on our investments. We have building permit revenue for the month of July came in almost 2 times higher than July of 17. And August is looking to be another strong month. Resort tax collections are also continuing to increase, with July resulting in a 13% increase over the prior year. So all of these factors are really pointing to a great year ahead for the city, assuming no significant economic changes occur. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Dana. Any questions for Dana on her FY18 fourth quarter report? Not seeing any. Thanks, Dana.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Okay. We'll move on to communications from our acting city manager. Dana, anything to report on between August 15th and August 20th, or any questions for, we'll start with questions. Any questions for Dana on the manager's report? Any additional reporting
Not at
tonight?
this time.
Okay.
No.
Thanks, Dana. We'll move on to item 11A, which I think we had comment on earlier at the meeting from Angel Dominguez requesting a change in the ordinance regarding selling of fireworks to individuals. Does anyone want to address this letter? Richard.
I think it deserves a response, first of all. And secondly, I know Chief Dial and I disagree about the need or necessity for a fireworks ordinance or the prohibition of fireworks other than our citywide display. It seems to me that if Columbia Falls and Kalispell can have an ordinance prohibiting fireworks within their cities that have been successful, then we should be able to do the same. So, having said that, looking at your faces, I would like to see, to poll you to whether or not we should go forward at least to take a look at said ordinance.
Is there interest among the council members to look at a fireworks ordinance?
I would have some interest in looking at it, Mr. Mayor. As a general proposition, I'm not necessarily in favor of a ban. However, given the problems we've seen, not just of trash, but of the potential fire problems, injury problems that can and always do occur, I would certainly entertain it. I think there's probably a basis to do that, but I understand the reticence of many in the community to do that. As a practical matter, we don't, I mean, the fireworks that come into the city are generally, I would say that only a small portion are actually sold within the city itself. And so any ban of selling fireworks in the city, I don't think would be functional for addressing the concerns that Angel brought to our attention. I think we would have to go to a situation where we would just ban the sale and firing of any fireworks within the city limits. But that, again, my only hesitance there is that part of the reason to do that would be the fire concerns, and large portions of what we think of as Whitefish are in the county. And fireworks can be fired off by anybody at any time and anywhere. And the problems of fire as a result of that are maybe even more exacerbated in those settings than they are here. But that's, so I would entertain it if there's any other interest in doing it.
We'll need a showing of at least 4 counselors to get it on a future agenda. Melissa, how are you sitting?
I'd be interested in, I think it's worth exploring at least. And
Okay. Katie? Ryan?
I agree with Frank. I think as a general proposition, I'm against it, against banning it, but I think we can take a look at it. That's
Okay.
fine with me.
Andy?
I'm going to say I'm against it, even though I think that they're a problem and I don't use them personally, but I don't know, I think from an enforcement standpoint, it's an absolute nightmare for us. And I think that typically, and from a fire standpoint too, the dangerous areas are outside the city limits more than they are inside the city limits. And until the county bans selling them, then they're gonna go off in town. And even if we ban them in town, I think we got a problem. And I'm pretty sure that we'll go through the process and we'll get down and we'll have a lot of people show up and say, don't take my fireworks away. That's what's happened when we've done it in the past. And we always go, yeah, right, we won't take them away, so. I
Looks
guess
like-
as a general proposition, if it sounds like we've got four yays here, so I mean, I'll listen.
It looks like we do have 4 yays.
We do,
Richard,
I
yes.
think.
I don't think
Yeah,
this
we
is
do.
something that we
And-
need to prioritize in the near term, given
Not
staff's
in the near-
workload.
It is not a near-term issue. It's something that I think is once again deserving of a work session, so that we can talk it through before we even, and if we decide even through a work session that this is not worth pursuing, because we've been there before.
Yes, we have.
We've done this since I've been on the council. And, but I think every so often it's worth a review.
And that's fine, I'm not against that, but looking at our adopted goals from our last meeting, I mean, we have a pile of work
Yes, we do.
sitting in front of us and sitting in front of staff, so I'd give staff the discretion to bring this forward when you feel it's appropriate and when you have time to at least pull materials together to have a meaningful work session. I'll leave that to your purview. With that said, we'll start with councilor comments, and we'll go ahead and start with Richard.
First of all, I went by City Beach today, and I want to shout out to to Anthony and another city employee who were dealing with a plugged sewer at City Beach. Somebody had flushed their bathing suit, and who knows what else was in this mess, and they had to pull it out, and they were having to fix it, and we don't pay them enough for that, and so a shout out to them. And I told them as much when I went by. I said, I'm going to call you guys out at City Council and say thanks. Secondly, I know that Chief Page told me today that we have firefighters at Lake McDonald, and firefighters in general. I've been interacting with them for the last several days, and a shout out to our firefighters near and far who are helping our community with a difficult fire situation. There just aren't any resources to manpower, person power to help us other than heavy equipment, which is absolutely needed, but thanks to them. And finally, I think you received a letter, if you haven't seen it yet, from the DEQ saying they intend to issue the water discharge, or the discharge permit for the BNSF Roundhouse. And they never have addressed our request for a public hearing or the concerns described in the city's letter, and I would like to see us have some sort of a follow-up communication and find out why. That's my comments.
I would support a follow-up if you'd like to, draft a letter for my review or our review, and we can get that out. I also know John Kenning, so I'd be happy to reach out to him personally and discuss the issue if that would be a little more expeditious.
I'm happy to write that letter I've forgotten exactly when it's going to be effective. If it's all right with council, it'll go out under your signature,
That's fine.
Mr. Mayor, without further review. Is that okay with?
Is that okay with council? I'm seeing head nods all around. So.
Get her done.
Thanks, Richard. Andy?
No comment.
Thank you. Ryan?
No comment.
Thanks, Ryan. Katie?
Come one, come all, to your local hootenanny this Friday. Friday, Depot Park, starting at 5 o'clock, we will have 3 wonderful bands as a fundraiser for the Whitefish Trail. This is our big fundraiser of the year to help support funds for the Whitefish Trail. Also, city council members, if you have some free time and want to donate more of your precious time, I'm looking for beer and wine pourers. We'll talk. See you Friday at 5.
It's a great T-shirt.
Thanks, Katie. Frank?
Thanks, nothing tonight.
Thank you, Frank. Melissa?
No comment.
Thanks. I think I'm going to hold off. I have a couple comments. They might be, rather minor, and I wish Adam was here so I could address these with him, and I think I might just hold off until he's back at the next meeting. And they're mostly related to the garbage situation in the downtown. I was down there again this weekend, and every receptacle was either broken or overflowing. I find it disappointing that the local businesses that reap the lion's share of the benefit of the work that we've put into the downtown with their help don't really pitch in and actually dispose of the overflowing garbage in front of their businesses, which is where the trash is being generated. I find that a bit disappointing, but I think we need to start looking at solutions for weekend garbage. I understand our waste management contractor is responsible for emptying those receptacles, if I'm not mistaken, but it's really not happening, at least frequently enough. So I'll follow back with Adam on this issue. I also have been noticing, and I'll follow back with Adam on this as well, that over the last couple meetings, we've lacked information in our packet regarding our work session agenda items. And I don't mean to put any one individual on the spot, but for example, we had some 2 fairly large topics we were discussing at our meeting last week related to the urban forestry program, which you guys did a great presentation for, or on in the work session. And then also, the parking question in the downtown. And again, Hillary brought forward some great ideas and concepts that we're pursuing, but it would be nice from my perspective to have information included in our packet ahead of the regular work session so that we can do our homework and come in and be better prepared to ask you questions. So I'll follow up with Adam on that. I think that's under his hood, so to speak, but I just wanted to make the council aware of those 2 concerns. So I will follow up. On that note, anything further from council? How about staff? Dana?
Topic real
Okay.
quick. I did discuss that with Craig because I've also heard complaints of that continue. And we are requesting of North Valley a cost estimate of what it would be for them to pick up on the weekends because that's not included in our contract. And then once we get that figure, we're going to consider whether that's a cost-effective way of doing it or if we need to look at staff that's scheduled on weekends to be able to do that. So It is something we are currently working on. We just got to get the figures back.
Okay, I appreciate that. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.